may have passed. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P 500 is up 0.5%, up 14. The Dow's up 0.4%, up 103, and the Nasdaq's up 0.5%, up 45. The 10-year is down 3/32 with a yield of 0.69%. West Texas Intermediate crude's down 0.7% at 32.58 a barrel, while COMEX gold is up 0.6% at 17.3730 an ounce. The dollar yen is currently at 107.63. The euro's $1.10.61, and the British pound $1.23.31. American Express is shifting hundreds and hundreds of employees in its sales units to handle collections and other credit work, and plans to set aside more for loan losses this quarter. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Markets is brought to you by Commonwealth Financial Network. For the sixth straight time, J.D. Power ranks Commonwealth #1 in independent advisor satisfaction among financial investment firms. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. I don't know about you, Lisa, but one of the things I'm really looking forward to as the economies begin to reopen is going out to restaurants and bars and actually interacting with people. Barry Ritholtz, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He's a Bloomberg opinion columnist and host of Masters in Business. He's got a column out, Lisa, that discusses the grim American bar scene and why many of them may not even survive this pandemic. Barry, thanks so much for joining us here. Kind of, what did you learn as you chatted with the host of Bar Rescue?
So a couple of things. First, it is grim, and what first got me focused on exactly how grim it was before I spoke to John Taffer, I spoke to Pat LaFrida of LaFrida Meat Purveyor. You might know that name because they created the original Shake Shack burger, and they're a supplier to restaurants like Peter Luger's and all the high-end steak places. And LaFrida told us that half of the restaurants he supplies to are not doing takeout or curbside service, and of those who are, they're running between 25 and 30% of their normal volume. So already we see the restaurant industry is going to be in trouble because they're just not seeing the sort of revenues they were previously. Taffer takes it a step further, and he says it is so expensive to reopen after you're closed for 3 months. Think about it. Everything in your refrigerator has been thrown out. You have no inventory. You have to get some line of credit just to stock up the refrigerator. And that's what led him to say 40% of the bars and restaurants are very likely to not make it through this whole crisis.
And he's not alone in those kinds of estimates. There are a lot of estimates coming out. This has been one of, if not the most hard-hit sector, and it's hard to see how it's going to emerge that quickly. I'm wondering what the restaurant of the future looks like. Is this going to permanently change the concept of dining out to a more takeout model, kits that you can cook at home, that type of transition just to be more resilient through all types of waves of the economy?
You know, I kind of divide the world into the pre- and post-vaccine eras. And once we have a treatment and a vaccine so people are comfortable, look, there's a reason why restaurants and bars were as popular as they were pre-crisis. Humans are social animals. We like to go out. We like to break bread together, drink together, socialize. I just can't imagine a future where bars and restaurants have a 6-foot social distancing and you're not sitting in a loud, crowded, busy room. But I don't
with a piece of plexiglass between you and anybody else.
Right.
Try to ask somebody else out on a date with plexiglass in between you.
Right. That's kind of unlikely. But that said, a little context also helps. Restaurants and bars are a notoriously challenging business in the first place. They have razor-thin margins, a lot of built-in costs. The restaurants that I expect are going to hang around very often, at least outside of the city, are the ones that physically own their space. So rent isn't an issue. They're probably not even, if they've been around long enough, they're probably not even paying a mortgage. They just have their property tax. That's a very different scenario than someone at a busy intersection corner in Manhattan paying big giant rent to some big skyscraper owned by one of the big REITs, that's a very different situation. And you don't know how those, how on earth can those companies come out of 3, 4, 5 months of a fraction of their revenue, but 100% of their costs.
Barry, I want to shift gears a little bit. I know you recently interviewed one of my favorite authors, Michael Lewis, author of Liar's Poker, which was just such a fun book back in the day. I guess the conclusion was an article, "The U.S. under Trump is like a team without a coach," was one of your recent columns. What did Michael Lewis mean about that?
So, two really interesting projects he is working on, both kind of connected in the same place. The first is the book he wrote right after the election called The Fifth Risk, and it focuses on Governor Chris Christie, who was head of the Trump transition team. It's actually law that once you become a major party nominee, you have to put together lists of all these people who are going to be able to slot into important positions within the government. You don't want to allow that transition period to put the country at risk, either in terms of national security or defense or anything like that. And you also want to facilitate everybody hitting the ground running pretty quickly. That executive transition of power should be smooth and flawless. And to everybody's shock, the day after he won the election, Trump fired the entire transition team and basically threw away 4 months of work. And in the book, The Fifth Risk, Lewis talks about, the problem with not having experts in their various roles at places like the National Institute of Health or the Center for Disease Control is that if something happens, well, we're not prepared for it. And turned out that the book was very prescient, given what's been going on with COVID-19. Now, hold that aside, because that was 2017. Last year, in 2019, he started a podcast called Against the Rules, and he looks at different aspects of sports and life and where they intersect. So
unfortunately, Barry, we're going to have to leave it there. We'll have you back on to talk more about that. That's Barry Ritholtz, Bloomberg opinion columnist and host of Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio, also founder and chair of the Ritholtz Wealth Management Group. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks rising to a 12-week high on signs that people are starting to return to work. Unemployment rolls shrank for the first time during the pandemic. Jobless claims were just over 2.1 million last week. However, continuing claims, which tally Americans' ongoing benefit claims and state programs, dropped. Orders for durable goods took another big dive last month. Bookings for goods meant to last at least 3 years plunged 17.2%. The last 2 months, factories have borne the brunt of the sharp cutback in demand. CVS will try to deliver prescriptions with self-driving vehicles in a test that begins next month. The health giant will partner with Silicon Valley robotics company Neuro on deliveries of medicines and other products to customers near a Houston area store. And the organizers of the Coachella Music Festival are said to be asking artists lined up for the annual event to play in 2021 instead. That's a clear sign that this year's show will be canceled. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
How long? How much? How many? Financial, policy, and medical experts are working on answers 24/7.
What about public debt?
We are listening to those experts 24/7.
Is the Fed effectively widening this wealth gap with its programs?
Because you want answers too.
What's the most important, the trillions in stimulus, the economy's reopening, or the infections curve bending?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Are you interested?
Thanks to National Lottery Players, South Denbighshire Community Partnership are now delivering hot meals to elderly people in the community like Bob and Sarah.
Thank you.
And £600 million of National Lottery funding is on its way to thousands more local projects across the UK during these exceptional times.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen.
The NHL is always on the ice with these awesome hockey podcasts on TuneIn. Get your goal with the Spit and Chicklets podcast.
Brian Yandel, Keith Yandel, thanks for coming on. What's going on?
Nothing much. Glad to be here. You guys got some nice digs here.
We heard you took Southwest 2-stop flight to get out here.
Yeah, well, just...
Carve up the ice with NHL at the rink.
The other day I wrote a story. Artemi Panarin, Semyon Varlamov, Sergei Bobrovsky, they all helped arrange for the purchase of N95 masks to benefit hospitals in their respective markets. This is another one of those positive stories you're seeing.
Or create your own power play with Locked On NHL.
All these teams invested future assets to take a run at the Stanley Cup right now. Like, all of those teams would have a real serious gripe, like trading these multiple first-round picks to make a run at a cup. You're right.
Discover these and more NHL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
Neil. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a podcast on TuneIn. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen. Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Did you know that with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations broadcasting in your area? Discover local news, talk, and music stations. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Coming up, we're going to take a look at the record number of bankruptcies sweeping across the United States. Plus, Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent for Bloomberg, on the jobs data and the Trump administration canceling their economic forecast. But first, let's go down to Greg Jarrett, get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg, what do you have for us?
Paul, stocks continue to edge higher, extending their recent rally. Data indicates a drop in the number of Americans filing for unemployment, and that's possibly spurring some of the optimism. As the coronavirus pandemic continues to hit the global economy, Jeffrey Okamoto, IMF First Deputy Managing Director, tells Bloomberg about the IMF's role as a crisis policymaker of last resort.
We are approaching the world in the context of this pandemic in a new way. A lot of that you can see in how we are provisioning our facilities for emergency finance at this point in time, which is we're telling countries, spend what you have to at this point, but please keep the receipts. And we're going to be holding countries accountable on the back end for this, but we're not second guessing some of the decisions they have to make in terms of spending on critical health priorities and social safety nets.
We check the markets every 15 minutes. The S&P 500 is up 0.5%, up 15. The Dow's up 0.5%, up 126, and the Nasdaq's up 0.4%, up 40. The 10-year is down 2/30 seconds with a yield of 0.69%. West Texas Intermediate crude's down at 0.2% at $32.75 a barrel, while COMEX gold's up 0.5% at $17.35.30 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.65. The euro $1.10.54, and the British pound $1.23.18. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
The Fed has implemented a number of policies aimed at propping up valuations of credit, yet they have come clean, saying that they're not looking to necessarily prevent insolvencies that otherwise would have occurred. And certainly we are seeing those insolvencies at the fastest pace since May 2009. Joining us now to talk about it, James Crombie, Senior Editor for Credit for Bloomberg News. James, thank you so much for being with us. You tabulated the data, found that May was the biggest month for larger U.S. bankruptcies since 2009, with many more expected. Are these companies in general were they on the brink of bankruptcy, and are they using this as an opportunity to restructure their balance sheets? Or are most of them really becoming insolvent due to the coronavirus and the effects therein?
I think you're really seeing a mix there. I mean, there were companies coming in from the retail sector like JCPenney and Neiman Marcus, which both filed this month, that were already struggling with the secular changes in retail. Now their stores are shut. Now no one's going shopping. They threw in the towel. They filed for bankruptcy. In the transport sector, I mean, you could really say that, this virus has caused people to stop traveling, and that's a reasonable change that you could say had pushed you over the edge. You need to restructure your debt, you need to reorganize. So we had LATAM Airlines, we had Avianca, and then in the oil sector we had the collapse of oil prices, which you could say is completely unrelated to the virus, and we've had a lot of distress, a lot of bankruptcy in that sector too.
It's interesting, James. Give us a sense of, you could argue that, boy, this might just be the very early innings of this. So based upon your reporting, how bad could it get?
Yeah, I think, looking at the macro numbers, I mean, I know that some of the employment numbers have been less bad, but, overall, the outlook for the economy isn't great. The growth is under a lot of pressure. The economy, globally is under a lot of pressure, so that is going to put a strain on balance sheets, and companies are going to suffer. And we look at where the bonds and the loans of those companies are trading, and we're seeing a lot of distress. It's eased a lot after what the Fed did. That pushed a lot of liquidity into the markets, and that brought spreads down. But it hasn't solved, as Lisa said, the solvency issues, and we are going to see a lot more of it.
So the question becomes, what can investors plan to recover from this debt as companies file for bankruptcy? A lot of people saying that recoveries are expected to be much lower this time around. Are we getting any clarity on what on the ground are the recoveries and what some of the companies are hoping for?
I think it's going to be all over the map, and it really is going to be case by case. But it is going to be lower. There were worse protections for investors coming into this crisis. And I think a lot of people are going to be fighting over scraps at this point.
James, it's interesting. This, the bankruptcies here, we've seen also on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of companies in the bond market raising money, trying to shore up the balance sheets, improve liquidity. Is there a chance that maybe this, the capital markets might save a bunch of companies here?
I think they're pumping liquidity in at a time when companies really need it, and they're giving them a pass to a certain extent, even though, some investors we talk to don't expect any return to anything like normal for as much as 2 years. So, you can see that they really are giving them a lot of leeway, not just from the capital markets, but they pulled down a lot of revolver debt. They borrowed at a massive pace in the investment grade market. They borrowed $1 trillion already this year, which is the fastest ever that they borrowed that amount of money.
James, I got to say, James, I was reading an IMF financial stability report last night because that's how cool.
You were reading what?
Yeah, I know, Paul. I know. I was waiting for it. You're like, hold that thought. But that's true. I was reading an IMF financial stability report for this year. I confess to everyone who's listening, that is what I was doing yesterday around 5:30 p.m. I am, though, interested in some of the statistics that they showed, that the structure of the financial market has changed so dramatically since 2008, where you had the banks really taking on a lot of the risk back then, and then it was pushed into the shadow banking system, and that is where the risk has been. And in some ways, the Fed measures that have put in place so far, including buying junk bonds, have in part part been in response to a bailout of the shadow banking system, in effect, basically saying we need to prevent a mass-scale default across the board because pensions own this stuff, as do a lot of other major institutions. James, how much have the Fed programs already? Do we have a sense of how much they have prevented defaults that otherwise might have happened?
I think that they have postponed a lot of defaults that will happen. I mean, I think they've kicked the can. They've pushed tons of cash back into markets, into borrowers that rated really, really low. Some of them triple C. That you could argue, that their businesses aren't sustainable over the long term. Maybe they shouldn't have that money.
James Crombie, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. James Crombie, senior editor covering all things credit for Bloomberg News, talking to us about the bankruptcies really starting to ramp up, Lisa, and it feels like we're in the early innings of this, which just kind of gives more ammunition to those who are saying we really need to reopen this economy sooner rather than later.
Yeah, but not all of these bankruptcies are the same. There are a number of companies that had over-leveraged balance sheets coming into this, and sometimes bankruptcy is necessary. Companies need to be allowed to fail. Otherwise, you get what we hear from people saying zombie companies that have too much debt and are not necessarily earning enough money to justify the interest they even pay out on those bonds and loans. And I just have to wonder whether it's good or bad for longer-term economic growth to prevent defaults that might otherwise happen with companies that perhaps are too small for their capital structures and don't necessarily have the future that's as bright as their debt loads might imply.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen a lot of companies, big and small, tap the capital markets, as James is just reporting, more than $1 trillion raised so far this year, the fastest that's ever happened. So just extraordinary capital markets as well in the marketplace. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. for world and national headlines with Nathan Hager. Nathan, what do you have?
Well, Paul, with the U.S. death toll from coronavirus now past 100,000, President Trump is calling it a very sad milestone. He put that on Twitter this morning. In his first comments on the benchmark last night, the president's Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, called it a fateful milestone that could have been avoided.
According to a study done by Columbia University, if the administration had acted just 1 week earlier to implement social distancing and do what it had to do, just 1 week sooner, as many as 36,000 of these deaths might have been averted.
Meantime, there is progress on the search for treatments. Roche plans to pair its immune suppressor Actemra with Gilead's remdesivir in a late-stage trial, and GlaxoSmithKline says it'll produce 1 billion doses of a booster that could be used with a COVID-19 vaccine. President Trump is going to sign an executive order today aimed at social media. A draft obtained by Bloomberg shows it would narrow liability protections that Twitter, Facebook, and other sites enjoy for third-party posts. This comes after Twitter put fact-check links next to President Trump's tweets for the first time this week. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi moments ago called the president's targeting of Twitter outrageous. She's faulting the company for not taking down some of the president's tweets. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry is calling for criminal charges against the white police officer caught on video kneeling on a black man's neck. George Floyd's death in police custody has sparked 2 nights of protest. Fry was asked on CBS this morning whether he thinks Floyd was murdered. His answer, I do.
I'm not a prosecutor, but let me be clear. The arresting officer killed someone.
The Justice Department has opened a civil rights investigation. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong.
Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The
the law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right. Use it. To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
With COVID-19.
Thanks to National Lottery players, the Emerald Centre are now providing emergency food supplies and support for people in Bedfordshire like Alan. Thank you. And £600 million of National Lottery funding is on its way to thousands more local projects in England and across the UK during these exceptional times.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with moonpig.com. Download the app now.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Okay, here we go.
With the NFL draft in the books and the schedule set, check out a TuneIn podcast for daily updates on the lead up to the 2020 season. Like the Ringer NFL Show, where a rotating cast of Ringer experts talk with players, coaches, and special guests about the NFL landscape.
A lot of the other teams that we consider...
Or ESPN's NFL Live.
If there are some delays because of the COVID-19...
Search sports on TuneIn to explore these pods and much more.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
Round the Bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
Buckle up, race fans.
NASCAR is back in the driver's seat.
And you can cut straight to the action here.
With the Performance Racing Network on TuneIn, you can hear PRN's live coverage of some of this year's top events.
As NASCAR's top drivers, Kevin Harvick,
Clint Boyer, and more get back on the track.
Search Performance Racing Network to listen and see upcoming races.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks rise to a 12-week high as data indicates the economic damage from the coronavirus pandemic is less severe than anticipated. Treasuries are down. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500's up 0.5%, up 16. The Dow's up 0.5%, up 116. And the Nasdaq's up 0.5%, up 44. The 10-year is down 2/30 seconds with a yield of 0.69%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is now up 0.6% at $33.01 a barrel, while COMEX gold is up 0.5% at $17.3640 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.66. The euro $1.1067, and the British pound $1.2320. Some of the optimism comes from the U.S. states' jobless rolls numbers, which shrank for the first time during the coronavirus pandemic, and a sign that people are starting to return to work, even as millions more Americans filed for unemployment benefits. Continuing claims, which tally Americans' ongoing benefit claims and state programs, fell to 21.1 million for the week ended May 16. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, it's Greg Jarrett was just reporting jobless claims. It's a case of, a glass half empty, glass half full. The glass half empty is that another 2.1 million folks filed jobless claims. Good news, I guess, the glass half full would be the continuing claims fell to 21.1 million, the lowest it's been for several weeks. To get a sense of what's going on in the jobs market and what it means for the overall economy, we welcome Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent for Bloomberg News. Mike, thanks so much for joining us here. What's your takeaway here of the jobless claims number that is so closely watched here every Thursday?
Yeah, nowhere near as good as people are making it out to be. And, of course, I'm giving people credit for making it out to be good on a relative basis. Obviously, 2.1 million people filing is nothing to be really happy about. But we forget that you have to add in the pandemic insurance program that Congress added for gig workers who normally aren't eligible. There were over 1 million who filed for that this past week. So you're looking at 3.1 million rather than 2.1 million in terms of new filers. Now, this is 10 weeks in. So why do we still have 3 million people still filing for unemployment insurance? It probably tells you that some companies are giving up and just simply going out of business, and they aren't going to make it through to the other side. There's also a focus on the continuing claims numbers, but those are distorted by California and Florida, which only report every other week. So if you look at the California numbers from last week, Florida numbers from last week, they were very big. Well, 2 weeks ago, really, because these are delayed by a week. They're not the same week as the initial claims. But they had big numbers 2 weeks ago, and then the most recent week, they have very much smaller numbers. So those will go up and down. So I don't think the numbers really are all that great, and I don't think they're anything to write home about at this point. They don't really tell us that things are getting significantly better.
I'm struggling. I have so many questions, Mike. I wish that I could have just been in a room with you just to say hi, but also to talk through the numbers.
Yeah, how are you? We haven't seen each other in a long time.
I know. How are you? It's nice to talk with you. It's nice that we're doing this for everybody to hear. I will say there is a question about those continuing claims. Some people saying that there are other programs, the pandemic unemployment insurance program, where some of the numbers are pulled off into that. And then if you count that in the total of continuing claims, in other words, individuals who are receiving benefits from the government, one of the governments, whether it's federal, state, is in the excess numbers of 31 million individuals. Very different than the other number that we're getting. Can you sort of square these discrepancies for me?
Well, there are a number of different programs. That's the only real discrepancy here is there are different programs for people receiving benefits who are in railroad retirement, who are former federal workers, people who are getting the pandemic numbers, people who are getting extended unemployment insurance. So when you add them all up, there are over 30 million people who are receiving some form of unemployment benefits, and that was up from 27 million the previous week. So the numbers are not really going down, they're going up.
Mike, I want to switch gears a little bit. A lot is being made of the Trump administration canceling what I guess is their mid-year economic forecast. And for us non-economic geeks, how important is that? Should we be worried about that, or is this an issue?
It's more of a political issue than an actual economic issue, in the sense that they're supposed to report in July or August an updated forecast for the economy as part of the Budget Act, which every administration has always done. Their argument is that it's too hard to see what's going to happen to the economy going forward, but heck, the CBO did it. The Fed is going to start renewing their economic forecasts at the June 10th meeting. We talked to John Williams about that yesterday, and he said, it's what we're supposed to do. We are economists. We can come up with models. We may be wrong, but at least we can start with something. So there's no excuse for the administration not doing it, except that the numbers are going to be awful. And if you're running for president, it doesn't help you to put out a number that looks awful. So they're going to dodge it this time. It's not going to have an impact on markets or anybody. It may have an impact by its absence on voters.
I want to pick up on something that you were saying, the idea that we're getting this volume of jobless claims this far into the shutdowns and even the reopenings that we're seeing right now. Does it tell us something about the types of jobs that are getting eliminated at this point and what it means in terms of a recovery?
Well, we're still seeing a lot of people losing jobs in the hospitality and leisure area, which is what you would expect, all the restaurants being closed. And we've heard from a lot of restaurateurs that even if they can reopen, the kind of restrictions they'll have on how many people they can have in there will make it very hard to make money. And so you would expect some of these people are just going to do the calculation and say, even if I can reopen, I'm not going to make it. So it's not worth it. Why throw good money after bad? So I would expect you'll see a lot of that. You'll see a lot of small retail, that sort of thing, go out of business because they just can't make it. And hopefully those people are entrepreneurial and will come back with a new idea and a new business, but it's going to take a couple of years.
So, Michael, what do you think is kind of a reasonable consensus here for how bad the unemployment rate will get and then maybe how it might trend on the other side?
Well, most economists, when they add up the available information, think we're going to end up in the 20% range, maybe a little above that when we get the May numbers. When we reopen more and more places, the companies that can reopen, the big factories and things like that, they may have fewer workers, but they will be bringing people back. So you'll see a rapid decline in the unemployment rate, but then it will stabilize. Most people are guessing 10% to 12%, and that's the part that will get really hard to bring it down below that.
I'm wondering when we're going to start talking about bridging the skills gap, the idea that the new jobs getting created are different from the jobs that are getting eliminated that may never come back. Are we hearing anything on that front in terms of corporate spending or government programs geared at that?
No, nobody has looked at the future of employment in the context of this crisis. There are training programs out there, and there's general agreement that they don't work very well and need to be revamped. And businesses are obviously going to have to reskill people or change their skills. A lot of companies are going to try to improve productivity by increasing automation. They've learned they can do more with fewer people during this crisis. So it's going to go on for a while. It's going to be very difficult for people to find jobs in some of these industries that just go away.
Michael McKee, thank you so much for being with us. Mike covers all things international economics and policy for us for Bloomberg News, Bloomberg Radio, and Bloomberg Television. I feel like I should just stick my Alexa in front of the mic and let it go, and I will be officially automated, Paul, I suppose, on this day. The jobless claims were really interesting to me. It was sort of a Rorschach test, I would say, in terms of finding the angle that you wanted to with it. Perhaps some green shoots, but still a pretty dismal picture with more than 40 million individuals in America filing for jobless claims over the past 2.5 months. I'm Lisa Abramowitz, along with my co-host and colleague Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Markets.
In addition to Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the latest news and biggest newsmakers on Bloomberg Television. Look for us on DirecTV Channel 353 or check your local listings. Sometimes the simple...
Switch on Acorn TV, the brand new streaming service featuring world-class TV from Britain and beyond. Watch exclusive premieres like the colourful crime drama Queens of Mystery.
Once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
And fan favourites like Inspector George Gently.
I'm just an old copper doing his job.
If you love drama with a little mystery thrown in, enjoy 30 days free with code ACORN30. Then just $4.99 a month. No adverts, no contract, cancel anytime. Join online today at acorn.tv.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, to the 5, touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
Wanna bet football can make you feel nostalgic?
Playing days are over, so...
On the podcast, NFL Alumni Lounge, Charlie Booth sits down with retired NFL legends to talk about their careers, life after football, and everything in between.
This is Darren Waller. Good to have you.
Yes, sir. It's good to be here.
Dana White, welcome to the Alumni Lounge.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Big member of our NFL alumni family, the CEO of the XFL, Mr. Oliver Luck.
Charlie, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
We're here with the president,
Mr. Eric Price. Good to see you.
Search NFL Alumni Lounge on TuneIn to listen.
You love TuneIn for live-breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
He does! Fabry wins it!
To standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, this is Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston, and we start today with the markets. Maybe we have a 4th day in a row, and Kaylee Lyons is going to tell us about it. So, Kaylee, how are we doing?
Yeah, we are heading for our 4th day of gains, David. It's so interesting because looking at the equity market, you wouldn't really know that there were escalating tensions between the U.S. and China after China approved those Hong Kong security measures against the U.S. wishes, of course. The U.S. saying Hong Kong is no longer autonomous. There's a laundry list of scenarios that could result from that. But geopolitical risk really just doesn't seem to be at the forefront of traders and investors' minds. It really seems to be all about this reopening narrative, the idea that maybe we have bottomed out and we're seeing marginal improvements in the data, like the U.S. Continuing jobless claims we got today. Yes, still a horrific number, 21 million, but that was the first time that those continuing claims had actually fallen since the pandemic started. Where all of that leaves us is we're up about 0.5%, nearly 0.75% for the U.S. major averages. While interestingly, David, it is small caps that are underperforming today after a recent string of outperformance. And we're seeing that reflected in the equity market as well. Of course, this week, the big narrative has been the cyclical value rotation into weaker areas of the market like financials and energy, for example. They are still outperforming on the week. The financials index, for example, is up by about 8%, but they're actually lagging on the day while we're seeing some buying come back in to the technology sector, although not so much into those FANG mega cap tech names. They are still in the red on the week at this point, David.
Well, the interesting thing there, Carrie, for me at least, is, as you say, it's the guys that got beaten up the worst on the way down that now seems to be bouncing back. And they are things like small caps, as you say, but also cruise lines and things like that. Is that really a question of have we hit bottom? Because if we've hit bottom, that means we may be coming back up.
Well, and that's what increasingly you're hearing from strategists on the street, saying that once we have seen potentially a bottom in the data is when we're going to see that rotation into value. So clearly that's what the market is betting on, because we have value stocks on pace for their best week relative to growth since all the way back in 2009. So clearly it is about that reopening narrative. That seems to be what the market is playing at this point, although we are seeing those trades unwind just a touch in today's session, David.
Okay, Kaylee, thank you so very much. That's Kaylee Lyons reporting on the markets. Well, the markets, at least today, may not be reacting to what's going on with China, but there's no question the relations between Beijing and Washington are increasingly strained as they clamp down in China on Hong Kong, and President Trump is none too happy about it. Welcome now, former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to China. He is Max Baucus, who, before he was ambassador, served for some 36 years in the United States Senate from his home state of Montana, including as the chair of the Finance Committee in the Senate. So, Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. Give us a sense of where we are right now, because the rhetoric seems really troubling.
I think it's important to know that Hong Kong is neuralgic to China. I was at a summit between President Obama and President Xi Jinping, and I was struck with that back then, 2014, just how strongly Xi Jinping was upset with potential American interference in Hong Kong. It bothered him more than any other subject during that summit. It's Hong Kong, it's Taiwan, it's Xinjiang, it's Tibet. Those are such strong core issues for China, and they will do whatever it takes to maintain as much control over those areas as they possibly can. Now, I think, frankly, that China feels a little more emboldened now by taking this action, which clearly does violate the basic law in Hong Kong. More emboldened because the United States is withdrawn so much from the world scene. It's withdrawn from TPP. It's withdrawn from under America First. It does not quite have the same power and influence worldwide as it may have had several years ago, and Xi Jinping has seen that. This action, frankly, it just is quite ominous because there's not much the United States can do about it. We can try to rally international opinion. I don't think that's going to have much effect. Add to that, it's going to further drive a wedge between Taiwan and China because Taiwan is very sympathetic to Hong Kong. And the more Taiwan is sympathetic with Hong Kong, more that's going to upset China and create even greater tension between China and Taiwan. It's going to hurt business in Taiwan, clearly. It's going to hurt American business, too. But really what this comes down to is the realization that China is here. China's not going anywhere. China's proud. China's defiant. And we Americans have to do a better job figuring out how to deal with this phenomenon, how to deal with this big country, China, how we get their respect, because we have to figure out some way to deal with them. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to leave the planet. We're not going anywhere. We're here. So we have to figure out how to coexist in a much more sound way.
Well, there's a lot of talk going on in Washington, as you know, about things that maybe the United States might do to influence Beijing. You just said that it's so important to Beijing. It's not clear anything's going to work, but they've talked about things like the autonomous status, changing their trade status. They've talked about delisting Chinese companies. In the New York Times today, there was even some speculation maybe we would really interfere with bank relationships. That is to say that U.S. banks couldn't deal with Hong Kong banks. Would any of those have an effect with Beijing?
I don't think so. Beijing's made up its mind. It's going to weather the storm, and it feels it can weather the storm without too much difficulty. It's as we know, under the handover in 1997, Hong Kong is to revert to China in 2047. Xi Jinping has just accelerated that. I mean, it clearly has violated the basic law, the terms of the handover, but basically, all these actions that we are considering are going to hurt China a bit. They'll hurt U.S. a bit. They'll hurt Hong Kong a bit. They'll hurt world trade a bit, but they're not going to force Beijing to change its mind. Beijing's made up its mind. It's going to slowly, gradually take over Hong Kong and merge it in with southern China.
What does that say about investments in in Hong Kong? Because there are enormous Western investments in Hong Kong, a lot of operations for U.S. banks and others there. That really suggests that those investments are a melting asset, frankly.
Well, the question is how quickly they melt. It partly depends upon the actual provisions in this national security law, which has not yet been passed. And it depends on the implementation, the definition of terms. But clearly, the passage of the law by China as it affects Hong Kong It's going to cause a lot more Beijing control over Hong Kong, and it's going to undermine significantly the rule of law. I think, frankly, Beijing is going to just tighten the noose slowly. Don't want to create too much of a stir, but the writing's on the wall. It's clear that over time, investments in Hong Kong are going to have to, investors in Hong Kong are going to have to figure out, do they want to work with China? Do they not want to work with China? Want to leave? Can they deal with China? You know, a lot of American investors are in China, not just Hong Kong, but in China, and do very well. They develop relationships that are not threatening to China. So a lot of decisions are going to have to be made. But bottom line, the atmospherics of this are not good. It pushes us more toward a kind of decoupling. It pushes us more toward a kind of a Cold War. And I just hope that the cooler heads prevail. We don't do things that cause more problems they're going to solve.
Ambassador Baucus, you, of course, are a lifelong Democrat. At this point, do you see any difference at all between the Democrats' position with respect to China and the Republicans? Or is this one place where there's true bipartisan agreement?
There is generally true bipartisan agreement. I think the one difference you'll see is that under a Trump presidency, if he gets reelected, it'll be more of the same. If Biden's elected president, there'll still be a strong bipartisan concern and almost antagonistic approach toward China. The difference will be that under a Biden presidency, it'll be more stable. That is, President Biden will not change his mind as often as President Trump does. And I think under a Biden presidency, Beijing will think, well, gee, we can deal with this guy. They don't like us. They're tough with us, but a deal is a deal with him. Whereas we try to deal with Trump, we don't know if we have a deal. That'd be the difference.
Okay. It's really a delight to have you with us, Mr. Ambassador. That is former U.S. Ambassador to China. He is Max Baucus. And coming up, we now have a plan out of the European Commission for how to help the European economy. Our very own Stephanie Flanders will be here to take us through that plan, which is a big surprise to many people. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Market upheavals.
The narrative is driven by...
Ready for a one-of-a-kind look at the NFL? On the PFF NFL podcast, Steve Palazzolo and Sam Munson interpret the unique stats of Pro Football Focus to analyze the league, uncover secret superstars, and discuss which teams to watch out for in the next Super Bowl.
Let's talk some football. Let's do it, Steve. All sorts of stuff. We're going to do most improved defenses around the NFL. Solomon Wilcots, our very own. He went into some detail over at PFF.com. Most improved defenses around the
Search
NFL.
PFF NFL on TuneIn to listen.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
The NHL is always on the ice with these awesome hockey podcasts on TuneIn. Get your goal with the Spittin' Chicklets podcast.
Brian Yandel, Keith Yandel, thanks for coming on. What's going on?
Nothing much. Glad to be here. You guys got some nice digs here.
We heard you took Southwest 2-stop flight to get out here.
Yeah, well, just...
Carve up the ice with NHL at the rink.
The other day I wrote a story. Artemi Panarin, Semyon Varlamov, Sergei Bobrovsky, they all helped arrange for the purchase of N95 masks to benefit hospitals in their respective markets. This is another one of those positive stories you're seeing.
Or create your own power play with Locked On NHL.
All these teams invested future assets to take a run at the Stanley Cup right now. Like, all of those teams would have a real serious gripe, like trading these multiple first-round picks to make a run at a cup. You're right.
Discover these and more NHL podcasts right here on TuneIn. Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player.
active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
Round the bases with the StatCast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks, Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one, not only.
Catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
This is Mike Golick Jr. from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Wingo, Dad, and I sit down and discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to stand out stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown to a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, right to the 5, touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
Are you fully informed on the NBA? On the NBA Hangtime podcast, veteran sports writers Sekou Smith and John Schumann analyze the latest NBA news, storylines, and discussions with guests from around the basketball universe.
Isaiah Thomas joined us here on the Hangtime podcast. Isaiah, good morning.
Everybody's doing well. As you know, my daughter tested positive.
Search NBA Hangtime on TuneIn to listen.
Can deliver this could make a difference, couldn't it?
No, and this is something, I've even had seasoned commentators on all things European say that this might actually be one reason why the 2020 wasn't only known for COVID-19, which is quite a striking thing to say. But this is really a historic move, potentially, by the European Commission. And as you know, David, it sort of comes after we had the leadership of, the 2 most important countries in the European Union, France and Germany, President Macron and Chancellor Merkel coming together and proposing a very similar plan last week. So we know that something like this has the support of those key players, which makes you think it is quite likely to happen. But the real importance is this is serious budgetary support, a big chunk of it in grant form. So it's real money. It's not loans with a lot of strings attached, which is designed specifically for the case of this crisis to help the countries that need budgetary support. So this is going to be countries like Italy and Spain that most need help, in effect getting money from the richer economies, which, as you know, throughout the Eurozone crisis, that was the line that the Germans really didn't want to cross.
Well, a terribly important point. It goes to where it's needed, but it takes it away from countries that are doing better. We always think about Germany in that connection, but we also have things like the Netherlands. We have Austrian things. There's a few steps they have to go through before this plan actually becomes real, right?
Yeah, it will need to get the support of everyone. And, of course, when it comes to Europe with 227 countries, that's not always going to be easy. But I think what is different this time and why we think that something similar to this will ultimately happen is what I said earlier, is the fact that you have France and Germany on the same side pushing for this. In the past, of course, it's been Germany that's been, if you like, the ringleader of the frugal group of countries that feel like they've managed their affairs very well, and they don't want to reward countries who've got themselves into difficult situations like Italy. And that was very much the dynamic in the Eurozone crisis in 2012. There was not a desire to have a lot of burden sharing with those countries. But COVID, in so many ways, is different, and it is different. Germany is looking at it differently. Not only is it opening the spigots in terms of its own spending that we haven't seen in the past, willingness to borrow a lot of money, but also is understanding that this is not, you can't blame this on Italy not having structural reforms, of being an inflexible economy. All these countries have been faced with a shock which is not of their own making.
Germany's looking at it differently. At the same time, Chancellor Angela Merkel made it clear that it's going to take some negotiation and some time to get this done. Here's part of what Chancellor Merkel had to say.
I believe that with their own proposal, Germany and France have made a good contribution to this one. It is clear that the negotiations now will be very difficult. This will not be concluded at the next EU Council meeting. The aim must be to find enough time in the fall for national parliaments and for the European Parliament to discuss, so that this is ready to come into effect on the 1st of January next year.
So, Stephanie, that sounds like we shouldn't be waiting for this anytime soon. Are we talking about the fall or even toward the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, of course, nothing is ever instant. And, of course, that is why we have often said that this kind of government support, even if when it's coming from national governments, you don't necessarily think that the fiscal support is going to be as effective or as quick as support from central banks. So, of course, what the European Central Bank continues to do is going to be very important for Europe. But I think because this is specific, this is supposed to be a one-off. So, of course, there's a possibility that we'll never see this again, although it's symbolically important. But if it is designed to help countries respond to this pandemic, I think there's a sense in which it has to happen on a reasonably tight schedule. And if it did happen for January 1st of 2021, I think it could still give serious support to countries that will be facing these enormous bills from the pandemic.
And the big question, perhaps, is how is it going to be paid for as a practical matter? Because sooner or later they have to pay for this. As I understand, it's going to come out of the budget of the European community generally. But is there enough money in that? Are they going to have to actually tax? Are they going to have a treasury for the European community now?
So they're going to borrow. The European Commission is going to borrow in order to supplement the budget for this. And each country will be liable for the share of that borrowing according to their relative size in the European Union. So, of course, the richer economies will be liable for more of that borrowing. But this is the really important thing that's different. In the past, we've talked about having corona bonds or having some kind of that was the key step that the European Union needed to take, was to have some idea of federalism, of federal debt, where they're all taking on. This isn't quite that, because it's the European Commission and each country is kind of liable for its own part, but it goes a big step towards that. You are starting along that road that the US took quite a long time to get towards being a federal union.
If it happens, what does it mean for the European economy?
Well, as I said, I think it will do some good. So it's not just the symbolism in the history books. It's enough money, 750 billion euros. In the case of Italy, the money that it might reasonably get could be several percentage points of GDP. So it's serious money. But it will matter, of course, how it's spent. And I think that's one thing that will be very important long term. It's supposed to be one-off. But if it looks like it went well, if it looks like it was well spent by Italy, and that maybe Germany's been a bit harsh in thinking that Italy is always going to waste any money it's given, then that could really put it on the road to being this historic milestone. But it will matter how it's spent.
Okay, Stephanie, thank you so very much. That's Bloomberg's senior executive editor for economics, Stephanie Flanders, who I'm pleased to say is a regular contributor to Wall Street Week as well. And we have two breaking news stories now as we've been talking. First of all, Credit Suisse is saying they're going to review lending to the most wealthy of its clients in the wake of the pandemic. In the meantime, BlackRock is attracting some of the world's largest investors. This is in the wake, of course, of PNC cashing out their stake in BlackRock. It shows that Larry Fink still has the ability to really attract some of the big investors. This is Bloomberg.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and to finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
To protect his home and family from disaster, Steve used courage, wisdom, and his camera phone.
That should do it.
Way to go, Steve! By simply taking digital pictures of his family's important documents, Steve can always have them stored safely online, no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
Whether it's another day of market misery, pandemic emergency, or both, one thing will still go right.
We have the latest world and national news.
Karen Moscow and Nathan Hager bring you the most accurate coverage.
The White House is looking for additional ways to support the economy.
Bloomberg Daybreak.
We continue to watch equities around the world.
Weekday mornings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for Stock of the Hour, and our Stock of the Hour is Twitter. In the middle, as we know, of a battle with President Trump, allegedly going to sign an executive order to really expand its possible liability today, and its stock is moving as a result. Kaylee Lyons is here to tell us all about it. Kaylee?
Yeah, David, you're right. Twitter is holding down about 2.5% right now. Of course, this drama all started on Tuesday when Twitter added a fact-check note to two of President Trump's tweets about mail-in ballots. This is the first time that they've ever done something like this. Their info page said Trump made unsubstantiated claims about voter fraud. And of course, that inspired a very fast and furious reaction from the president. He tweeted yesterday that he would strongly regulate or even close down social media platforms. He says silence conservative voices and that big action would follow. And today, reportedly, he's poised to sign an executive order, as you mentioned, to kind of rein in social media companies like Twitter. The administration spokesperson said today it's still in the works, but according to a draft seen by Bloomberg, it would have the government narrow liability protections for the company currently enjoys for third-party posts. Basically wants the FCC to issue new rules clarifying how the companies might act in bad faith when taking down or limiting the visibility of posts, and that could potentially allow users to sue the companies if the posts are taken down. I would say, though, David, if you ask analysts today, they don't really think this will have a substantial effect. Our analysts here at Bloomberg Intelligence say even if the president invokes Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, it wouldn't produce a meaningful change in liability exposure for Twitter or the likes of Facebook. Other analysts pointing out that the FCC, FTC commissioners generally have been opposed to social media regulation, so something like this may be more bark than it is bite.
Yeah, and in the meantime, the Twitter may have something of an ally on the Democrat side. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, as you pointed out to me, has come out sort of defending Twitter.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have the likes of Adam Schiff defending Twitter as well, but Pelosi called the situation outrageous, first of all, but then she actually said that Twitter hasn't gone far enough, that it actually is at fault for not taking down entirely some of the president's tweets. And she also pointed a finger at Facebook, saying that they're only in it for profit and that Facebook actually panders to the White House. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and I think think for the market today, it kind of reminds us that, oh yeah, big tech regulation is still kind of a bipartisan conversation on Capitol Hill. Obviously, other issues like the virus have been top of mind, but we're still facing antitrust regulation potentially, in issues of privacy. Of course, the election is big for these social media companies as well. And so I think that kind of brings to mind the fact that none of these issues are fully resolved yet for these big tech names, David.
Yeah, it's utterly fascinating. Thank you so very much, Kaylee Alliance, for that report on Twitter, which we will continue to follow. In fact, coming up on Balance of Power, we're going to talk to a law professor from Santa Clara University, Eric Goldman, about exactly what the president can do, what he can't do, what the First Amendment has to say about all of it. And by the way, does Congress get a vote? Because after all, it is a Communications Act that the president is seeking to interpret. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are climbing to a 12-week high after a slew of economic reports showed the deep damage to the economy was less severe than anticipated. The Dow is up 139 points, NASDAQ up 76, S&P 500 up 21. Initial jobless claims piled up by another 2.1 million last week, sending the grand total above 40 million. However, data also finds continuing jobless claims drop for the first time in 10 weeks. As for manufacturing, frozen factory lines led to a 17% drop in April's durable goods orders, and first quarter economic output fell for the first time since 2008. American Airlines is planning to cut 30% of its management and support staff as it tries to weather the dramatic downturn brought on by the pandemic. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know, with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President, Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
In these times of loss and crisis, the people you trust to ask the questions you need answered become even more vital.
Should the president, though, impose the Defense Production Act?
Carol Messer and Jason Kelly.
Help us understand what we know so far.
Bloomberg Business Week.
They are on the front line of the impact of the coronavirus.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for Bloomberg First Word News, and we turn to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Latin America is the new epicenter of the coronavirus. The region represents about 40% of daily deaths globally now. Brazil has more cases than any country except the United States. Some models forecast that deaths, currently at 25,000, could more than quadruple in coming months. Peru, Chile, and Colombia have all set daily records in the past week. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is making what he calls limited and cautious changes to the country's lockdown restrictions. He says schools can begin reopening on Monday, as well as outdoor retail stores. The Prime Minister says people can start to meet outside in groups of up to 6. Meanwhile, the UK's coronavirus tracing program was hit by technical snags on its first day, with some healthcare workers unable to log on to the system. The European Commission is vowing to stay away from fossil-fueled projects in its coronavirus recovery strategy. The EU's executive arm has proposed a $2 trillion package, including a revised long-term budget and a recovery fund, with 25% of the funding set aside for climate action. The money is designed to help coal-dependent countries move away from fossil fuels, but environmental groups are skeptical that the money will be used properly. There was a second night of violent protests in Minneapolis. Demonstrators were angry over the death of a black man in police custody. Police fired tear gas at the crowd, and protesters looted stores near a police station. One man was shot to death. Police say they have a suspect in custody. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Well, President Trump has been on the warpath with respect to Twitter, really complaining about their decisions to put things up and to take things down. And today, reportedly, he's about to sign an executive order that might actually take that to a legal status, perhaps expanding liability for social media companies. We're now welcome Eric Goldman. He's professor of law at the University of Santa Clara, where he's also co-director of the Tech Law Institute. I wanted to get it right, Professor. So, Professor, thank you for joining us here. I think we have to go to Section 230, right, in the Communications Act, the Decency Act. Explain to us what that does before we talk about modifying it.
Yeah, sure. Section 230 is a law that Congress enacted in the mid-1990s. And to summarize, it says websites aren't liable for third-party content. It means that websites can remove or post content based on their editorial standards and still not be liable for their decisions to publish or remove.
So that's about posting content, but to all appearances, what has upset President Trump is the fact that he posted something alleging that there was fraudulent use of mail-in ballots, and Twitter actually didn't take it down. They included a link to more information on the subject, so they were posting more information. Why is that involved?
Well, that now becomes a much more complicated legal question because, as you point out, it's not directly a Section 230 issue. The circumstance you described, Twitter has fact-checked the president and said there's more facts here that are relevant to readers. So at that point now, Twitter is saying, we think that this statement needs clarification, and we're going to give our readers more resources to understand it better. It's not really a Section 230 issue. That's more of a First Amendment issue. And as a result, a lot of Section 230 angst is misdirected.
Well, so that's fascinating. Can they modify Section 230 to actually create potential liability for Twitter taking something down? Because the allegation, to give President Trump and some of his allies their due, is this is specifically skewed against conservative voices, that it's there's a bias to the whole thing. And so we're going to make it possible to sue if you say that the reason it was taken down was because of the content of the speech.
Yeah, so Congress created Section 230. Congress could modify or repeal Section 230. But President Trump isn't working with Congress to try and do that. President Trump is trying to unilaterally change Section 230 directly in contravention to what Congress has already said. So President Trump actually really can't do that, and there's not a lot of tools that he has in his unilateral discretion to make any changes on that front. More broadly, even if Section 230 were changed by Trump or Congress, the First Amendment still going to apply, and there might be First Amendment limits to what any of those two other branches can do that would still protect the decision of something like Twitter fact-checking the president.
So talk about another aspect that at least has been rumored about something it might do, which is to somehow have a declaration or a rulemaking that basically says these social media forums are so big that they're essentially a public space. As I recall, back in the olden days, there was litigation about malls and places like that and whether the First Amendment rules would apply. Could the administration do anything, at least to interpret the question of the scope of the First Amendment in a public space such as social media?
The short answer is no, that any such interpretation comes from the courts, and it can't come from the executive branch. So if the executive branch were to take that position and it were challenged in court, the executive branch would fail. More generally, there are really good reasons why we don't want to think about private publishers as the equivalent of state actors subject to constitutional restrictions. When private publishers decide what content to publish or not publish, they're exercising their editorial discretion, something that's actually protected on its own in the Constitution. It's a really cherished right in our society.
Well, but this is a fascinating point you make, Professor, because traditionally the Facebooks and the Twitters of this world have said, wait a second, we're not like a traditional publisher. You can't sue us for libel. We're just passing it through sort of like the phone company. Have they positioned themselves to some extent to be a bit more exposed because they're not saying they're like a traditional publisher that's responsible for what is published?
Well, that's correct, but they're saying that because Section 230 says that. Congress made a choice 25 years ago to say we are going to change the normal default paradigms for liability. We're not going to say if you publish, you're liable, and if you don't publish, you're not. We're going to say you can publish and not be liable. And that's been the insight that's unlocked the creation of all these really great new services that didn't exist in the old offline world. So it's not the internet companies that are taking the position that they're like X or Y. They're saying we qualify for Section 230 as Congress anticipated, and we're creating all these great benefits that Congress wanted us to create.
Yeah, one last point here, because President Trump, when he tweeted out today, said this was going to be a great day for fairness when it came to social media. Fairness is something some of us remember back in the old days of the fairness doctrine from the FCC for broadcasters. But is there a problem here because that was done under a licensing scheme where you had to get a license to have a radio or television transmitter? There's no license that I'm aware of for social media.
That's correct. The fairness doctrine basically says that broadcasters have to carry some content that they don't want to carry. It's an incursion on the freedom of speech and press. And that was authorized under the Constitution because of the fact that broadcasting is subject to this licensure scheme. The Internet isn't subject to that licensure scheme. They are not subject to the same rules, and therefore you can't impose the same kind of fairness obligations on Internet companies that you might have been able to impose on broadcasters. The last thing I'll add on that, and I mean to make sure everyone understands this, it was Republican doctrine for 50 years that the fairness doctrine was a deprivation of private property rights. And so to see the head of the Republican Party today saying that we need a fairness doctrine for the Internet really shows how far the Republican Party has changed.
Yeah, we've come a long way from Ronald Reagan. Fair point, Professor. Really great to have you with us. That's Professor Eric Goldman of Santa Clara University School of Law on the question of Twitter. Coming up here next, maybe a new way to use artificial intelligence to fight the pandemic. We're going to talk with the CEO of Boy Health. They have an app out that actually the governor of Virginia has endorsed for use down there. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
What began in China has expanded world.
Picture in your mind a stylish Audi with striking LED headlights, sporty alloy wheels, and some of our most advanced features, including a 10-inch digital cockpit and smart assistant systems like lane departure warning. Picture what that Audi looks like. Now think smaller. The Audi A1. It's not a small car, it's a small Audi. Visit audi.co.uk. Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik.
This is a message from the government about the next stage of controlling coronavirus with NHS Test and Trace. To protect your friends and family, testing and tracing must become a new way of life. If you have symptoms, you need to get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we will contact you to trace people who you might have infected. From now on, if you're told you've been exposed to an infected person, you must self-isolate for 14 days. Play your part and do the right thing so we can safely return to a more normal life. Go to nhs.uk or call 119. Stay alert, control the virus, save lives.
At Tesco, we've price-matched Aldi on hundreds of products like bananas, peppers, chicken breasts, mushrooms, Warburton's bread, strawberries, even avocados. That's Tesco products at Aldi prices. Because now more than ever, every little helps. Tesco. Prices checked on comparable products from GBLD stores and online twice weekly. Price most often found matched excluding promotions. Selected Tesco stores excluding Express and all Northern Ireland stores. Products and their availability vary weekly and by store. Details at tesco.com/Aldi price match.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is,
or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn. Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, well, Jeter Downs didn't realize he was a top. Like my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course, Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
round the bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn. Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, explore a sports documentary on TuneIn, like Sports Wars, telling the origin stories of classic rivalries, Raise Sports, about the concussion crisis that threatens football's future, and Dunkumentaries, a podcast devoted to the beauty and power of the slam dunk. For these and more, search sports documentaries on TuneIn. With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying to
standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
Important question, and something that we've wrestled with in our day jobs, even before the pandemic. The way that we're really doing this now is, first, we're adhering to the CDC guidelines on what people should do next. So given that coronavirus is a new disease and the science behind it is changing on a weekly, if not daily basis, we actually have a clinical team in-house that's dedicated to making sure that we're consistently consistent with those CDC guidelines in helping people understand what to do next. And actually going a step further from that, we actually follow up with patients. So people can opt into receiving text messages from Buoy after they initially use the product. And by following up them and seeing what they ended up doing, how they're doing in quarantine, what the outcome was, we can come in and actually give information back to our internal teams, but even to our partners to say, okay, actually, this is what ends up happening for these sets of people with these symptoms, with these issues, and really providing that feedback loop, to your point, David.
Health is everything, obviously, but also we need to get paid. How do you get paid? Are the states paying you? Is there advertiser support? Where's the revenue coming from?
So, we've never really we've always thought, the ad play really hurts the trust that we're building with the end user here, the patient who's sick, who's scared. The companies that pay us are either large self-insured employers who are looking to reopen and are paying for buoy for their employees, insurance companies who are paying for buoy for their members, or for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Both governments have paid for a version of buoy that's specific for that particular state that can help the resident understand where to go within the state's set of resources, both from a hospital perspective, from a insurance and telemedicine perspective, as well as from a testing perspective.
Yeah, and finally, briefly, if you could, Dr. Lay, you mentioned large employers who are looking to bring their employees back safely. Talk to us about this other related product, as I understand it, called Back with Care. It's a platform. What does that do?
Sure, David. So, as you know, we really responded to COVID very early on, and based on our audit of the space, we actually were the first digital health company to respond to coronavirus in the United States. Because we moved there so early, we really had the brain space to think about, what's going to happen next. And what's going to happen next is facing the challenge of how do you reopen in this COVID positive world before a vaccine is out. And so we've developed a product that really is a further advancement of our coronavirus product that can help an employer help their employees come back safely. So the employee would use buoy on a daily basis to talk about their symptoms, if they have any, talk about their tests, if they've had any, talk about any known exposures, and receive direction from their employer on what to do next, whether that be come in today or, we're actually going to have you stay at home today so that we can keep the right amount of people coming in, socially distanced, masked, etc., to get people back in a way that is as safe as possible during this 12 to 18-month period before a vaccine is out.
Yeah, which is terribly important for the employer. But the other thing, as I understand it, it gives information to the employee. As we all think about going back, how do we know what the situation is in that workplace or in the area where that workplace is? As I understand it, that provides some of that to me as an employee as well.
Exactly. We're taking into account the local level of disease in that particular area. We're taking into account what's happening with that office. We're even taking into account what, at the employee level, what's going on with your fellow employees. So
it's really fancy. It's really nuanced. Thank you so much, Dr. Lay. Thank you so much, Dr. Lay. That's from Boy Health, Dr. Lay. And this is Bloomberg.
There are times when you have to go it alone. But these should not be those times.
With a medical crisis, can any other central bank execute?
When things move this quick, do things break?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz.
The range of outcomes is so wide.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern.
Walk me through the dynamics that are going to shape the euro.
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, BloombergRadio.com, and now watch us on Bloomberg Television.
You know your body, and you know when something's off, when something doesn't feel quite right. Don't ignore symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, rashes, and fever. They could be signs of lupus. Listen to your body. Take care of yourself. We're here to help you take control of your health. Learn how at BeFierceTakeControl.org. Brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of America and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. The chairman and CEO of Citigroup, Michael Corbett, spoke with our colleague Eric Schatzker earlier today. And one of the things they talked about were the long-term consequences, perhaps, of relying so much on the Federal Reserve for support for the economy.
We don't want to see consumers, small business, big business come out of this in a indebtedness position that's just unsustainable. And that's why I think you've seen in a number of these programs that they've been structured in a way that they're actually grants or have aspects of forgiveness in them, provided the monies are used appropriately. And so the government's thinking about the same thing. We don't want to end up with an economy where our consumers and our business are just saddled with untenable levels of debt. We've got to be mindful that while going into this, the U.S. from a position of strength in terms of the economy growth rates, employment, from a monetary and a fiscal perspective, not without some challenges, right? When you think of the toolbox out there, not just in the U.S., but around the world, low rates, negative rates in some places. And so not a lot of things on the monetary front that can necessarily be used with high impact today, which leads us to fiscal. And the fiscal programs being put in place in terms of small business lending and payroll protection and Main Street lending programs that are out there. And that clearly will take up the levels, or as some people would say, balloon the Fed's balance sheet, and by the way, other balance sheets. And we've got to be mindful that we do not want our government, the U.S. or other governments, to come out in a position where the debt at the government level, the federal level, is untenable, because, again, we're likely to be in this slower growth environment for an extended period of time, and we've got to make sure that we've created that balance in terms of people continuing to have confidence in terms of not just the U.S. government, but governments around the world.
So in your mind, how does the government exit, as it were? There are some people who say government doesn't need to, right? Monetize the debt, embrace modern monetary theory. And then there are others who say, as soon as it's practical, we're going to have to raise corporate taxes. We may have to raise tax rate on individuals, certainly wealthy individuals. We're going to have to start to chip away at the mountain of debt that we've created as a result of doing the right things to fight this crisis.
Well, again, I think that as you look at this, that we've been in this extended period of fairly lax or easy monetary policy, not just in the U.S. and around the world. And if you go back and look at the Fed balance sheet coming out of the last financial crisis, they were on a path, on a trajectory of getting that back down to, I think, levels that people were becoming much more comfortable with. Obviously, with this, we've had to go back in the other direction. And as we try to get to the other side of this and hopefully come out in the not too distant future, it's going to be back on the table. But as you cite, a couple of things that are out there is that one is the U.S. does continue to be the world's preeminent reserve currency. And, when you look at our treasury auctions and others, it has a very strong international borrowing base and therefore has capacity. I think the second piece of it, and I don't want to be lulled into a false sense of complacency, but the low interest rates impose a very low cost in terms of the U.S. government borrowing to be able to fund these programs that are out there. So, again, I think we've got to be prudent. We've got to be mindful in terms of the absolute and relative levels of our indebtedness. And we do have to have a trajectory to get it back to a more sustainable level over time. But I still think we're in a reasonable place right now. And it goes back to how long this goes on for. And again, what needs will be in the future and what kind of commitments it will take from not just the U.S. but other governments around the world to be able to support their economies. We don't know exactly what the path will be like, and so we've got to be very, very mindful of that. I think the U.S. system, like Citi, comes into this from a position of strength, and as part of that, in the first quarter, you saw us build, again, as a company and as an industry, considerable reserves. We built almost $5 billion of additional reserves. We've got about $23 billion of reserves right now set aside. And again, we'll continue to watch as we go forward. And as you can imagine, the calculations and the modeling that we do remains very sensitive to unemployment. It remains very sensitive to GDP, to housing prices. And so as we continue to look at what we think the future trajectories are of those, we'll continue to make appropriate decisions around reserving into the future. So again, a position of strength, I think trying to be prudent, smart about it, making sure we're there and the important things to support our clients, but being mindful in terms of capital and capital trajectory into the future.
That was Chairman and CEO of Citigroup, Michael Corbett, speaking earlier today to Bloomberg Television. And later on today, I'm going to get to talk with the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, about the status of the coronavirus in his state, how they're coming back, and by the way, will commuters still come from New Jersey every day into New York? That's coming up later on Bloomberg Television. For now, that does it for Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury. Swiss watchmakers have been bracing for the worst year in the modern history of watchmaking. Now the reality is here. Exports plunged 81%, the most in at least 2 decades, as the coronavirus pandemic led to factory closures, shuttered shops, and travel bans. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez announced that the tourism industry will reopen for foreign visitors in July. In response, Soto Grande on the Spanish Mediterranean coast is about to discover how much golfers will dish out to get its Ryder Cup level courses, yacht slips, and polo fields safely. A private jet service offers virus tests before boarding, fewer passengers, private terminals for clients en route to their seaside villa or hotel room. In Malta, VistaJet has a similar product offer. The global aviation company is using a network of freshly sanitized jets, cars, and private VIP lounges to whisk the stir-crazy elite to Malta, where their fully stocked yachts will await. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
You're living in a world built on science, political and economic.
You've got to believe the labour market gets hit.
Computer and medical.
Clarify where we are on a test.
It all makes a difference.
What do you think needs to happen in terms of governmental response?
And it's all here.
He expects the virus to peak quite a long time from now.
Get your science straight.
The hand-washing campaign, is this actually a good strategy?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking. Now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our #1 priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
For all
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 12-week high for the U.S. stock market. Stocks are gaining this Thursday as data shows the economic damage from the coronavirus pandemic is less severe than anticipated. S&P 500 extending gains into a fourth day led by utilities and healthcare companies. Right now, the S&P is up 27 points at 3,063. That is a gain of 0.9%. The Dow up 182 points, up 0.7%. NASDAQ up 95 points, up 1% today, bringing its year-to-date gain to 6%. The 10-year down 6/32 with a yield of 0.70%. Gold is up 0.6%, $17.19 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude rallying 3.4%, now at $33.94. Citigroup plans to reopen its New York headquarters to a small number of employees as soon as July. Workers will be returning to London offices even earlier as CEO Michael Corbat pushes the bank forward into a world reshaped by the coronavirus pandemic. And on Bloomberg Radio and Television this morning, Corbat talked about a number of other topics, including the biggest challenges now facing Citigroup.
I would without a doubt say it's the uncertainty, right? As we look at this pandemic, and again, this is a health crisis that has manifested itself into an economic crisis, is what we don't know. There's still so much unknown about the health challenges and therefore how this will play forward and what the ensuing economic challenges will be.
Citigroup shares, they are down now by 3.1%. Gold is up 0.6%, $17.19 the ounce. Sam West Texas Intermediate crude up 3.5%, $33.97 a barrel. 1:02 on Wall Street. Time now for the Market Drivers Report with a focus on American depository receipts. And here is Dave Wilson.
Thanks, Charlie. Just looking at ADRs at the moment, they're higher, even more so than U.S. shares. The S&P ADR index is up 1.3%, and the S&P 500 is higher by 0.9%. Spain's Telefónica has risen 5.5% in U.S. trading. The Spanish newspaper Expansión reported that the phone company has been offered about $10 billion in bank financing for a proposed merger of its UK unit, O2, with Virgin Media. Denmark's Genmab has climbed 4.9%. The drug maker said a proposed treatment for a blood disorder met the main goal of a final stage study. Genmab is working with Johnson & Johnson, whose Janssen unit actually conducted the research. China's Momo has fallen 5.1%. The social media company reported that monthly active users fell 5.6% in the first quarter. The decline outweighed earnings and revenue that topped analyst average estimates in the Bloomberg survey. And another Chinese company, NIO, is down 7.2%. First quarter results showed the electric car maker's revenue fell to the lowest level since its initial public offering in 2018. Charlie?
All right. I thank you very much, Dave Wilson, keeping track of those American depository receipts. The UK luxury retailer Harrods says it will reopen its flagship London store in June with social distancing measures in place, and it'll open an outlet shop to sell stock left over from the spring season. Recapping, U.S. equities higher across the board now with the S&P up 29, a gain of 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
Everybody in the world has one common enemy, and that's to win the war against this virus.
The first thing you do is listen to the medical professionals.
Those people that lost their pay, we want to see that pay continued.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
Our priority is the health and well-being and the lives of the American people.
We want to make sure that we are continuing to support our hospitals.
We've unleashed our most potent weapon of all, the courage of the American people.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Employment data come in a bit better than expected, lifting hopes for a recovery. U.S. tensions with China continue to grow, with the U.S. considering a range of options, and states continue to move cautiously toward reopening, even if their citizens try to speed things up. From New York, welcome to the second hour of Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Even the hardest hit states are gradually starting to reopen, including the state of Michigan, which ranks fourth in the number of COVID-related deaths. We welcome now Democratic Congressman from Michigan, Haley Stevens. So, Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start with the most important thing. How are you doing in Michigan? How is the COVID pandemic there?
Well, thank you, David. Look, it's a
pretty sobering moment in Michigan. We have had over 5,500 Michiganders lose their lives to the coronavirus pandemic. There's still a lot of uncertainty around what it's going to look like as we start to come back. Our governor's been doing a fabulous job of keeping people updated, providing the recommended health guidelines. But I know communities, David, like Livonia, where I represent, just outside of Detroit, have been very hard hit, and they're taking it seriously.
Yeah, well, I actually was born in Flint and raised in Ann Arbor, partly, so I know Livonia pretty well. So give me one update that we heard from Lieutenant Governor of Michigan 2 or 3 weeks ago, that there was some migration. Originally, it was down in the Detroit area, Wayne County, places like that, but it actually was being seen upstate a bit, up north, as we would call it. Is that true? Is it growing in the north?
Well, what we've seen are hotspots outside of the metropolitan area that have caught our attention. So as you move westward in Michigan, just outside of a region like Kalamazoo, for instance, Vassar, Michigan, which is a small town, kind of as you head up into the thumb, had an outbreak at a home for girls. And it was cited due to lack of personal protective equipment. And it was somewhat surprising, right? I mean, this is an area that's about 120 miles from Detroit, and yet they're experiencing an outbreak. And certainly our nursing homes, David, that is one of the things that we saw in Livonia, where we have a very high per capita instance of COVID-19 and an unfortunate loss of life. But it's also because we have a large percentage of nursing homes in Livonia, and some of them experienced outbreaks.
So give us a sense about the reopening process. As you said, you're just tentatively stepping into that. Governor Whitmer has been very outspoken. You say she's communicating well. At the same time, she's gotten some criticism for it from some of the Michiganders there. Well, how's that process going? Where are you in it now?
So we're in a phased process. We've started to see some reopening by appointment of our retailers, of our shopping centers. We've seen our automotive showrooms reopen, again, with appointment only. And I would say that we are in a slow crawl right now with a full reopening. And that's in part because of how hard hit we were and how important and necessary it is for us to stop the spread. And so, I'm getting the information just like everybody else. Right? I'm a congresswoman. I'm here legislating in D.C. I think we've got to see the public health and the economic health as inextricable to one another. And I'm focused on both solutions for us. Certainly the double-digit unemployment, still working with a lot of my constituents who are trying to get those unemployment claims filled or some of the questions answered, getting people access to the resources that they need. And I'll tell you something else, though, that's been really inspiring is our manufacturing economy in Michigan, stepping up to meet the industrial moment and to get those personal protective equipment materials made, to get the specs connected to one another, the ventilators produced. It was obviously our big three, David, on down to our supply chain companies like Alpha USA, for instance, that have just been doing remarkable manufacturing, creative and also resourceful activities that have really helped to meet the industrial moment of what we experienced with some of the supply chain disruption and the need for supply chain recovery.
Tell us about your role as a congresswoman there. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, has a 4th round of possible stimulus that she would like passed. That seems to be stalled right now with Republicans, as far as I can tell. You also have your own version called the Child Care Stabilization Fund Bill. Tell us what that is and how that fits with what Speaker Pelosi's trying to do.
Well, absolutely. Look, as a congresswoman, the legislating hasn't stopped. The need for good government hasn't stopped. And so with the Child Care Essential Act, what we have proposed is a grant funding initiative to stabilize the child care sector in America and to support providers to safely reopen and operate. So just as we're talking about bringing people back to work, and we've seen this with our essential employees, right? So our grocery store workers, our nursing home employees, our incredible nurses and doctors themselves, they still needed access to childcare. Childcare was available, but in a limited way. And because of the dramatic drop-off in the utilization of everyday daycare in America, we've seen just an incredible loss of revenue from daycare centers across America. And they're staring at a pretty grim picture, right? And so we have to make sure that we're not starting all over with daycare in America, that we're in some ways making sure that they can be up and running and providing that service, obviously, as it goes with their clients. You know, I mean, it's something that people pay for, but it's got to be there for them. And you've even seen some examples of this, David, where people have had to step out of work because daycare hasn't been made available. And so that's also something that we want to get in front of. And only about half of our providers stayed open during the crisis, right? So again, how do we get back to full operation and so that we're sequencing this reopening in a way that meets the needs?
Terribly important for so many people. Thank you so much to Congresswoman Haley Stevens from Michigan. Coming up, the United States has a range of options to responding to China's crackdown in Hong Kong. Bloomberg opinion columnist Eli Lake has one that we may not have heard of yet. He's going to be here. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
This probably wasn't what you expected.
Deaths from the coronavirus continue to climb.
But now you need to become an expert fast.
For the very latest, we're joined live.
You'll do it with the latest information, and we'll be right here to help.
Are you concerned that the economic damage could linger longer than the virus itself?
Bloomberg Daybreak with Karen Moscow and Nathan Hager. Weekday mornings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Right now, Doctors Without Borders medical teams are operating in some of the most remote and dangerous corners of the world. When front yards become front lines, at the crossroads of conflict and epidemic, where there are no hospitals, that's where we operate. Your response is critical to our response in places where few others will go. That's where we operate. Learn more at doctorswithoutborders.org.
Bloomberg and Eaton Vance are proud to present a Boston Pop salute to our heroes. This Independence Day, the orchestra's 4th of July tradition continues. The program will feature guest artists, highlights from past fireworks displays, new music paying tribute to the heroes of the current health crisis, and honoring the memories of those we have lost. Watch and listen Saturday, July 4th, starting at 8 Eastern, exclusively on Bloomberg Television and right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
You're living in a world.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment. Feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
There's a reason flash storage is called flash storage and not electronic non-volatile computer memory storage. From quick and efficient data retrieval to instant scalability, everything about IBM flash storage is fast. It's also cloud-ready and surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price of £310 for 24 terabytes of all flash. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Find out more at ibm.biz/flash offer.
This is a message from the government about the next stage of controlling coronavirus with NHS Test and Trace. To protect your friends and family, testing and tracing must become a new way of life. If you have symptoms, you need to get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we will contact you to trace people who you might have infected. From now on, if you're told you've been exposed to an infected person, you must self-isolate for 14 days. Play your part and do the right thing so we can safely return to a more normal life. Go to nhs.uk or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
You love TuneIn for live-breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Are you fully informed on the NBA? On the NBA Hangtime podcast, veteran sports writers Sekou Smith and John Schumann analyze the latest NBA news, storylines, and discussions with guests from around the basketball universe.
Isaiah Thomas joined us here on the Hangtime podcast. Isaiah, good morning.
Everybody's doing well. As you know, my daughter tested positive.
Search NBA Hangtime on TuneIn to listen.
Did you know that with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations broadcasting in your area? Discover local news, talk, and music stations. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn.
It's TuneIn Sports on this day. On this day in 1951, after going 0 for 12, Major League Baseball legend Willie Mays connects for his first Major League home run.
There's a drive to left. It's well hit. Way back and gone. Willie Mays with his first home run of the year.
To listen to conversations breaking down the moments just like this, search sports to be part of the discussion on TuneIn.
News 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 12-week high for the U.S. stock market. Highs of the day right now with the S&P up 28 at 3,064. That is a gain of almost 1%. The Dow up 162 points, up 0.6%. NASDAQ is up 99. That is a gain of just about 1%. 10-year down 5/30 seconds with a yield of 0.69%. Gold down up 0.5%, 17.18 the ounce, and crude West Texas Intermediate up 3.6% now, 33.97 a barrel. Stocks advanced as data showed the economic damage from the coronavirus pandemic is less severe than anticipated. Again, recapping, equities higher, S&P up 28, up 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It's time now for Bloomberg Opinion, and we welcome today columnist Eli Lake, who has a piece on the Bloomberg providing President Trump with maybe another option about how he might retaliate against Beijing for what it's doing in Hong Kong. So, Eli, welcome. Before we get to your option, which I found fascinating, let's talk about some of the other things we've been talking about. Obviously, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, has said we can't certify that Hong Kong is autonomous, which could have trade repercussions, not just with respect to tariffs, but also with respect to so-called dual-use goods, has some national security concerns.
Well, I think that the sort of laxer relationship that the United States has had economically with Hong Kong was, baked into an understanding that the Chinese, had signed an agreement that for 50 years, Hong Kong and China would have two separate systems. And, what we've seen with the now imposition of this national security law that I guess will take effect in September is, in a lot of ways, the final step of a year-long campaign where Beijing has intensified its efforts to basically model Hong Kong, in the words of the Secretary of State, on China instead of what the U.S. and the rest of the Western liberal democratic world hoped would be Hong Kong to be a model for China.
And one of the issues that people have raised about perhaps toughening up on trade with Hong Kong is it hurts the people in Hong Kong more than it hurts the people in Beijing. But you have a possible way out of that, actually, to make Hong Kongers' lives better, perhaps.
Well, I believe that this is a great opportunity for the United States. And while we're at it, the United Kingdom, Australia, Taiwan, and other countries to open their doors to Hong Kongers who are going to be fleeing the Chinese totalitarian system. And it's in my view, makes a lot of strategic sense for the United States in two important ways. One is that, as everybody knows, the secret to the economic success of a place like Hong Kong always is in the human capital. It's in its citizens, and the kind of financial and creative genius that we have seen that of Hong Kongers that has made their city-state such a towering economy is something that would benefit the United States, but it would also really weaken China, because I think that trying to create the conditions for a brain drain is something that will be sort of careful what you wish for, because if you want to make Hong Kong more like China, I think in general that alone will make it less prosperous. But also you can accelerate that and in some ways teach China a lesson that they cannot have their cake and eat it too. They cannot have an advanced capitalist economy and continue to manage their country, in a model that would please someone like Joseph Stalin.
So if one were to pursue the option that you've laid out here in this piece, would you take all comers? Because President Trump has been somewhat reluctant, I think it's fair to say, on the question of immigration, but he said maybe we should really tear it toward people that we really need and want, people who have the intellectual capital, and that's some people but not all. Would you have some sort of criteria about which Hong Kongers got to become American citizens?
I think that's a valid point, and I think the most important screening one would do is to make sure that the Chinese Communist Party was not sending agents, into the United States this way,
or at least people they wanted to get rid of. We remember Cuba and what happened with Cuba at one point, right?
Sure, or undesirables like that. Yeah. On the other hand, I kind of think that this is one of those things where it would work itself out, because the kind of people that would be most at risk under China's boot are the very kind of people who would want to figure out a way to flee Hong Kong anyway, now that the system is changing. And so I think that there's a kind of natural process where the people who will be most eager to come to the United States would also be the entrepreneurial class, because they have the most to lose, in the Chinese communist system.
How would President Trump's base respond to this? I mean, there's a question of how he himself would respond to President Trump, but even his base, he'd be thinking about this, because an important part of his campaign and his governance has been, we're going to shut down immigration, not increase it.
Well, it's hard to predict. I'm sure there will be some people who are really just nativists who want to keep anyone out. That won't like it. On the other hand, I think that there's a lot of people who are in Trump's base who understand that China is a real threat. That the president has been, at times talked about how China is responsible for the COVID pandemic and the deaths that have occurred because of COVID. So if he decides to announce his policy in terms that I'm doing this to weaken China, there's a chance that at least a portion of his base would accept that, because I think that a lot of Trump supporters are frustrated that, very little attention has been paid to an increasingly aggressive sort of China in these in the last 25 years or so.
Something that, by the way, Democrats and Republicans can agree on. At the same time, we could be talking about a lot of people. There's something like 7.5 million people that live in Hong Kong, I think.
Right, and I think that it would make sense if the United States and its allies offered this asylum at once, to people who are trying to flee the country. And I think that, in that respect, it might mitigate it. And I don't get the sense that you would have 7.5 million people fleeing Hong Kong. I mean, there's a number. I mean, even though I think we've seen in the recent elections and the protests, majority of Hong Kongers do not want to be, ruled under a Chinese-like system.
Right.
On the other hand, there's still a minority of Hong Kongers that don't have any problems with that, or there are other things. So.
And also, leaving home is always difficult for anyone. Okay, thank you so much. It's really great to have you with us. That's Bloomberg columnist Eli Lake. You can read more on this and other stories from Bloomberg Opinion at Bloomberg.com/opinion and on the terminal by typing in OPIN GO. Coming up, we're going to go over the latest jobless claims with Lindsay Piegza. She is chief economist at Stifel Nicholas. Those numbers came in about where expected, but the number of continuing claims actually went down more than people thought. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are climbing to a 12-week high as investors are hopeful that we've seen the worst of the economic damage from the pandemic. Well, even though more than 2 million people put in for jobless benefits last week, the Labor Department also reports the first drop in the number of people collecting benefits, which suggests many are returning to work. Many of Dollar General's customers in recent months walked in there for the first time. That resulted in a 34% jump in March sales, 21% in April. And the things we buy on impulse in the checkout line, like gum, mint, snack bars, are falling as more of us have received groceries delivered or picked them up curbside. Hershey noticed a huge hit, and Nielsen says sales of mints are down by almost a third year over year. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, kids, Dad's gonna teach you how to dance. First, spread your feet apart. Then, pump your knee, nod your head, shake your hips, and bite your lip ever so slightly. Now, with one hand in the air, point at people with the other hand. I call that the rock star.
Dance like a dad. It's a great way to make a moment with your kids.
Now, make a face like it just smells something bad.
Visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Market upheavals.
The narrative is driven by uncertainty about the virus.
Political reversals.
It's not clear that some of the Republicans up on the Hill are agreed with the Republican White House.
Economic shifts.
The macro clearly being driven by the coronavirus outbreak.
Everything seems to be in motion.
Will it also mean a global recession in your view now?
But here, you're on solid ground.
Looking forward to guiding you through all of this.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
With the shift to remote working, video conferencing has become the new normal to keep your business running. But is it reliable and secure? Cisco WebEx is committed to the highest security standards and already trusted by both small businesses and many of the world's largest organizations. Call, message, and meet securely with Cisco WebEx. Sign up at cisco.uk/work-from-home. When secure remote work is critical, WebEx is essential.
TSB believe in people helping people. So if for whatever reason you become an innocent victim of fraud, they will refund every penny you lost from your TSB account. Find out more about their fraud refund guarantee at tsb.co.uk. Terms and conditions apply.
This is a message from the government about the next stage of controlling coronavirus with NHS Test and Trace. To protect your friends and family, testing and tracing must become a new way of life. If you have symptoms, you need to get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we will contact you to trace people who you might have infected. From now on, if you're told you've been exposed to an infected person, you must self-isolate for 14 days. Play your part and do the right thing so we can safely return to a more normal life. Go to nhs.uk or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
At Tesco, we've price-matched Aldi on hundreds of products, like bananas, peppers, chicken breasts, mushrooms, Warburton's bread, strawberries, even avocados. That's Tesco products at Aldi prices. Because now more than ever, every little helps. Tesco. Prices checked on comparable products from GBLD stores and online twice weekly. Price most often found matched excluding promotions. Selected Tesco stores excluding Express and all Northern Ireland stores. Products and their availability vary weekly and by store. Details at tesco.com/Aldi price match.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Ready for a one-of-a-kind look at the NFL? On the PFF NFL podcast, Steve Palazzolo and Sam Munson interpret the unique stats of Pro Football Focus to analyze the league, uncover secret superstars, and discuss which teams to watch out for in the next Super Bowl.
Let's talk some football. Let's do it, Steve. All sorts of stuff. We're going to do most improved defenses around the NFL. Solomon Wilcots, our very own. He went into some detail over at PFF.com. Most improved defenses around the NFL.
Search PFF NFL on TuneIn to listen.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Coming up on Balance of Power, over 40 million Americans have lost their jobs because of the pandemic. Stifel Financial Chief Economist Lindsay Piegza is here to find a ray of hope, maybe. But first, let's get a market check with Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, David Weston. As I mentioned, it's an update here with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all surging to a 12-week high. You've got more on the jobless picture coming up in just a moment. Let's begin there. Claims piling up by another 2.1 million last week. April durable goods orders plunging as the coronavirus scars America's economy. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Last week's increase in initial claims sent the total since March above 40 million, an echo of the Great Depression. But the data on total unemployment rolls signaled some people are going back to work as lockdowns ebb. Manufacturing is taking a licking, too, with April orders for big-ticket items dropping 17.2%, while first-quarter economic growth contracted at a 5% pace. Household spending fell almost 7% last quarter. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And we've got more on the economy coming up in just a moment with Lindsay Piegza of Stifel Nicolaus. Well, one other economic note, pending home sales set a 21st century high today among the data that came out this morning. Also, recapping on the equity markets here, the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. 4-day rally underway with the S&P up now by 31 points. That is a gain of 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that, David Weston, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. As Charlie just told us, 2.1 million more Americans lost their jobs last week, bringing the total since the pandemic hit to over 40 million. But the numbers out today also showed a drop in continuing claims. Could that give us some hope? Lindsay Piegza, Chief Economist at Stifel Financial, is here to interpret the numbers for us. So thank you for being with us, Lindsay. Should we read a lot into the drop in the continuing claims?
Well, I don't know if we should necessarily read a lot into the continuing claims, but it certainly offers at least a ray of hope that things are beginning to at least moderate. Even on the initial numbers, we see the 2.1 million increase. This is noticeably below some of those prior peaks that we had seen. So again, moderating in terms of the numbers of initial claims, and then continuing claims falling 4 million to 21 million, a reflection, I think, this of states reopening. So at least some individuals that lost their job because of the unprecedented forced economic closures are beginning to return to work. So some of those restaurants reopening at reduced capacity, some of those businesses being able to reopen their doors and welcome customers back in. They're putting people back to work slowly but surely. So there's a little bit of a ray of hope in this morning's numbers.
Lindsay, as an economist, help us interpret any of these numbers at this point, because we're in such ranges that we can't believe. I think even the 2.1 would have been a record for many, many years just a few months ago. These bounce around a lot, and as I look at it, I think on the continuing claims, most of the reduction came out of two states, California and Florida. Do we think something different was going on in those states, or is it possible there's some record-keeping issues?
Well, we have heard that some states have had difficulty processing these claims, so you're seeing pockets of jumps week to week, or some sort of difficulties in terms of getting that paperwork into the system. So there could be some anomalies here that might be revised away as we start to dig through the data going forward. But let's not focus necessarily on the one data point, but the general trend. And the general trend is that continuing claims are beginning to at least dissipate from that peak level, suggesting that at least some Americans are getting back to a state of gainful employment.
Yeah, it raises the question, okay, we may have hit bottom. The question is, how fast can we start coming back? How come what do you look at? What are the indicators you're looking at? We had durable goods orders that were terrible, but they were better than people thought today, for example. Does that tell us much?
Well, they weren't quite as terrible as expected, but they were still pretty bad. So this does reflect the fact that we're still waiting for the brunt of the impact to show its face, waiting for those Q2 GDP numbers. So this morning we saw that revision of GDP in the first quarter down about 5%, although some of the specifics in the report do suggest that we were maybe on slightly stronger footing at the start of the year, particularly looking at final sales, which was a bit stronger than previously reported. But again, the brunt of the pain is to be felt April through June with an expected 30% contraction. And that's not likely to bounce away immediately. The lingering pain from that contraction is likely to be felt and likely to resonate throughout the economy for quite some time. So unfortunately, as much as we'd like to see a V-shaped recovery, it's likely to be a very slow, tepid recovery, both because of the economic impact, the profound economic impact that we've seen, but also because there's a lingering health concern for many Americans. Without a viable vaccine to separate the healthy from the sick, many consumers are going to still be very hesitant to re-enter the marketplace to the extent that they once did in the pre-pandemic environment.
A slow, tepid recovery, as you say, which is certainly, I think, what the economic numbers are indicating. But the markets, particularly the equity markets, don't seem to believe you.
Well, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of optimism in the marketplace. And we also saw that in the consumer confidence numbers. Consumer confidence picked up to about a 2-month high, and it wasn't because of the present situation component. It was because of the outlook for the economy, for the outlook for individuals' financial situations. So there still is a lot of optimism that if we can, and that remains a big if, but if we can get a vaccine in place that allows Americans to return to do what they do best, which is get out into the marketplace and buy goods and services, then we can get the economy back on track in a relatively short to medium term expectation. But I do think there's a lot of asterisks, a lot of ifs, a lot of hope built into that expectation.
Well, every time somebody comes out and says they may have a vaccine that might work, we see the markets go up, and particularly in the pharmaceutical sector, without a doubt. Does that raise a particular challenge for you as an economist? Because normally you're looking at economic numbers, and instead you've got to look at vaccine numbers, projections of vaccines, and how can you possibly assess that?
Well, we're still looking at the economic numbers. And remember, the stock market doesn't necessarily indicate the health of the economy. There's many times that we see this robust, unfounded optimism in equities that doesn't translate into the health of the underlying economy. So I do expect to see a lingering disconnect between those two for quite some time. But you're right, it does complicate the situation because in many cases we're not looking at how the economic numbers are unfolding, but whether or not a potential medical discovery could impact consumers' behaviors going forward. So there's a lot of different variables that maybe traditionally would fall outside of the sphere of economics.
Yeah, many of us didn't go to school to interpret virology numbers, I suspect. The other thing that the markets seem to react to is government intervention. Certainly with the Fed and then with enormous support giving from Congress. Now we're seeing it over in Europe with the European Commission stepping up. How important is it, given the economic numbers you're seeing, for Congress to come back with a fourth round? Because that clearly is what the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is fighting for, although Republicans say no big rush.
Well, I think at this point, with states slowly reopening, the vast majority of support that was needed has already been provided by the federal government, by the Fed. Now I think it's a matter of the Fed not getting in the way of the economy, trying to struggle back to a more productive level of activity. There are some that would argue additional fiscal support is needed. But we also want to make sure that we're leaving the economy in a place that we can thrive in the aftermath of this pandemic. And taking on trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars in debt may leave us in a longer-term restrained position when we do eventually get that vaccine and try to return to a place of prosperity. So it is a very delicate balance. And certainly the government wants to bridge the gap for businesses and individuals that are feeling the pain, but we don't want to place barriers at the end of that path that is going to make it an insurmountable hurdle to reach even a 2% sustainable growth rate when we do eventually emerge from this pandemic.
So, Lindsay, finally, let me ask you the unfair question that we ask everybody from the Fed all the time, so why not you? What are you projecting? What do your projections have for your, I guess, base case, but really in the center of the bell curve for when you think this thing may really turn around? Is it first quarter next year?
I think that's optimistic. I don't think that we're going to get to a pre-trend pace on a sustainable basis, and that's an important caveat, on a sustainable basis until well into 2022. I do think that we'll see positive territory as early as the third quarter, just because we calculate on a quarter-over-quarter basis.
Right.
But I do think we'll fall back into negative territory by the end of the year and remain very anemic in 2021.
It's been very helpful. Really appreciate it, Lindsay. That's Lindsay Piegza. She is chief economist at Stifel Financial. Coming up, Professor Jeffrey Kahn of Johns Hopkins about the ethical and legal issues raised in tracing and tracking the coronavirus. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
For the Jewish Communal Fund, Noel Spiegel, former senior partner with Deloitte & Touche and past JCF president, discusses the advantages of a donor-advised fund over a private foundation.
There's a lot involved in having a private foundation. You need to engage attorneys, you need to engage accountants, file tax returns. At JCF, all of that is done for you. You don't have to get involved in anything other than making your contribution to your fund and then determining which grants that you want to make.
A JCF fund may be opened with a minimum $5,000 contribution of cash or appreciated securities and can be used as an alternative to or together with a private foundation.
If you have a foundation, you have to list all of the contributions that you made. Potentially anybody, because the information is public, can find out exactly which organizations a foundation has made charitable contributions to.
Let JCF simplify your philanthropy and protect your privacy. Learn more about JCF's private client group at jcfny.org.
It's a stock market drive.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, explore a sports documentary on TuneIn, like Sports Wars, telling the origin stories of classic rivalries, Raise Sports, about the concussion crisis that threatens football's future, and Dunkumentaries, a podcast devoted to the beauty and power of the slam dunk. For these and more, search Sports Documentaries on TuneIn. Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, And it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn. With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunningham to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening. Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
round the bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pella. 12-week high for the U.S. stock market. 4-day rally. Data showing the economic damage from the coronavirus pandemic less severe than anticipated. Right now, we have got the S&P 500 index up 31 points, a gain of 1%. The Dow is up 180 points, up 0.7%. NASDAQ up 108 points, now up 1.1%, and should point out that in the year-to-date column on the Bloomberg, NASDAQ is now up by 6.1%. To put that in context, S&P is lower by 5.1%. 10-year down 5/30 seconds with a yield of 0.69%. Gold up 0.3%. 17.15 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 3.8%. 34.06 a barrel. Recapping, risk on. S&P up 30, a gain of 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That, David Weston, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. From New York, this is Balance of Power. Public health experts tell us that a key to fighting the coronavirus is not only to test, but also to track all who come into contact with those who test positive. And states are hiring thousands of people to do just that. But what are the legal and ethical issues raised by the gathering and use of all those data? That's the subject of a report out this week from Johns Hopkins Berman Institute for Bioethics and its Center for Health Security. Welcome now one of the authors of the report, Professor Jeffrey Kahn, Director of the Berman Institute and Professor of Health Policy at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is, of course, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. So, Professor, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the most basic question. You talk in your report a fair amount about DCTT, which is Digital Contact Tracing Technologies. What do you mean by that? What is included in that?
Thanks. It's a great question. Thanks for having me on, David. The technology really boils down to smartphone apps. It's how it's being conceived, by which public health authorities, employers, and institutions can help identify individuals who have been exposed to those who are infected by the coronavirus, and then that data can be shared with other individuals, maybe with public health authorities, maybe with your employer, maybe with the government, maybe with an institution like a university if you're a student. And so it's really the technology that would permit access to the mobile phone and then that data to be shared depending on how it's designed, either as part of the app being downloaded, some opt in, some opt out. It's a complicated set of possibilities, but that's the general idea.
Is there a doubt or a question about whether it would be efficacious if we had this system up and running?
It's a great question, and we don't know yet what the performance features will be like, whether what particular aspects will need to be in place for it to work, as you're asking, nor do we know what percentage of the population would need to actually adopt it and use it before it became efficacious. So a lot of this will be kind of learning as we go, but we thought it was important to write this report in advance of the implementation of these apps and the potential adoption.
So as we work on these apps, because a lot of people are working on them, what should we be keeping in mind? What structure should we put in place from the very beginning so we don't get in trouble down the road?
Yeah, it's a really good questions. And so listeners may have been hearing that Apple and Google have been working together to create access to the operating system on Android and Apple phones, known as the API. And they have indicated what will and will not be permitted to be collected and shared based on access to the API. And so one of the things we say is that's probably too limiting, that tech companies shouldn't alone decide what kinds of data will be collected and what can be shared, that should be part of a discussion with first public health and second with the public, because as we were saying earlier, adoption and use of these apps will be all important for them being efficacious. So that's one big take-home message. There needs to be a wider discussion about how these apps should work rather than the tech companies dictating that to us.
So are we talking about regulation? I mean, goodness knows various people in Washington are talking about regulating big tech. Is this something that should be regulated? If so, who would be the best to regulate? Where does that come out of?
Yeah, another really good question. I think there is a role for regulation, and we make some recommendations about that, but mostly related to how to make sure that there's consent by the individual, there's protection of privacy, ability to opt in and opt out, and prevention of the use of data for anything but public health. So it shouldn't be commercialized, it shouldn't be used for state surveillance, but rather really only for public health purposes. And we think that Congress is the right place for that to happen, because it doesn't make sense for this to be done state by state. We need federal leadership on this.
If there's a lot of opting out, though, doesn't that undermine the usefulness of the entire tool? I mean, don't you need to have it to be almost universal to really make it work?
It's a good question again, and what we don't know is what the right balance is between opting in, opting out, and adoption and use. So if there's too much mandatory sort of things pushed onto us that require opt-out and people don't use them, then they won't have the public health efficacy that we need. If there's too much opting in and lots of people use it, but it doesn't give the information that we demand or require or need, then we won't have a useful app either. So that balance is what we need to better understand, and we just won't know the answer to those questions until there are apps available and some adoption starts to happen. So there has to be flexible decision making built into all of this.
Now, as I understand it, Professor, what you're talking about are the apps such as that are being worked on that would work off of my cell phone automatically. Does some of your thinking, your learning, your direction on this also apply to sort of the shoe leather approach to contact tracing? Because, for example, up in Massachusetts, I know that Partners in Health, Paul Farmer, under the direction of the state, is actually going out with people and talking to folks who have come into contact with people who are test positive. Do some of the same considerations apply?
Yeah, they're related. So I think it's really important to say that these technologies are not standalone, and they won't solve the problem of contact tracing without the human-powered contact tracing that needs to happen. And as you're saying, it's being stood up in places like Massachusetts. So we're suggesting, and I think if people are thinking, that this will be in addition to and augmenting the human-powered contact tracing efforts. But it takes way more people than there are available. And so anything that we can do to bring digital and other, technological aids to the human-powered contact tracing, we think that will be helpful. So they'll work together. So the same issues that I'm talking about certainly would apply as humans and technology interact together to do this thing we call contact tracing.
As we look around the world, I mean, South Korea, for example, comes to mind. Are there some countries that are ahead of us on this who we can learn from, frankly?
Yeah, and that's in the report. The difference being in South Korea, it wasn't one app that was loaded on people's phones, but rather access to all sorts of data about individuals collected from everything from credit card use to access the healthcare system, to their whereabouts, on their mobile phones, which is very different than what we would be proposing, I think, anywhere in the U.S. And certainly that's not sort of just one app on your phone. But there are certainly lessons to be learned about how data collected from individuals in these other parts of the world. And I would add to your list Singapore, Israel, and China, all of which are, different than the United States, of course, but we can learn from what was done in each of those places, which were different from each other, about what might work best here.
But it sounds like, as in so many things in life, there's no such thing as a free lunch. That is to say, the more powerful it is, the more the concerns might be. And the less the concerns, the weaker it is.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And what we're saying is that individuals may realize those trade-offs, so they certainly will. We all understand what's happening to us by being in quarantine. And we may be willing to give up some of our privacy in return for ability to get out of our homes more quickly as a way of helping to fight the pandemic. So what's the right balance?
And you're going to make us think about that in advance, which seems only sensible. Many thanks. That was really terrific. Professor Jeffrey Kahn of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg. He is the founder of Bloomberg LP and of Bloomberg Philanthropies. That's going to do it for Balance of Power for today. I'm David Weston, and this is Bloomberg.
This pandemic.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Hairbands to kids. Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs. Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
This is a message from the government about the next stage of controlling coronavirus with NHS Test and Trace. To protect your friends and family, testing and tracing must become a new way of life. If you have symptoms, you need to get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we will contact you to trace people who you might have infected. From now on, if you're told you've been exposed to an infected person, you must self-isolate for 14 days. Play your part and do the right thing, so we can safely return to a more normal life. Go to nhs.uk or call 119. Stay alert, control the virus, save lives.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Connor to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic game replays to start listening.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything, from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
O'Neal. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from New York and New Jersey, streaming on YouTube. It is Thursday, May 28th, 2020, almost wrapping up the month of May. And Jason, here we have a day Another batch of weak U.S. economic data, heightened U.S.-China trade tensions. You've got Twitter in the crosshairs with the president dragging in other social media with it. And yet, we've got a rally.
You know, it's interesting. We have a saying around here at my house, on its grind, on my grind. And the markets are just on a grind higher. It's really amazing when you look at a cast of characters, investors here who just see the positive. They look past a lot of things that might be otherwise troubling, as you say, whether it's China or Twitter or so many different things. And here we go. I mean, the NASDAQ started lower and now it's up 1%.
Yeah. We're up at our highs of the session. So we're going to unpack, though, all of these things that should be fighting some of the positive sentiment. We'll get to that over the next few hours. Let's talk about that rally, though. Let's get to Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. 12-week high for the U.S. stock market. I do want to bring you an earlier headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. Jet maker Rolls-Royce, jet engine maker Rolls-Royce cut to junk by S&P. The S&P 500 index advancing up 0.8%. NASDAQ up 94. That is a gain also of 1%. Year to date, NASDAQ is up by 6%. We've got the 10-year yield at 0.69%, down 5/30 seconds. Gold up 0.2%, $17.12 the ounce. And crude oil surging 3.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude just under $34 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks a lot. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and our top story of the day, it's really a number of stories, and it's a theme that says, wait, what? All these things happening at the market grinding higher, especially in light of those jobless claims in the millions once again. We're going to get to that in a second with Andrew Husby. He's our U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics. But first, I want to turn to Dave Wilson, stocks editor, of course, author of the chart and stock of the day. Dave, set the scene for us because we're looking at a lot of green. As you look a level down in the market, what do you see?
Well, I mean, you're looking at a fourth day of gains for the S&P 500, and if it holds up, it would be the longest advance since the current bear market began back in February.
Dave Wilson, we're calling it the pandemic era, just so you know.
Okay. The pandemic era, then. That's fine. Works for me. It's kind of a grab bag, though, in terms of today's gains. It's not like, you can look at the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500 and see an obvious theme in a sense that, you've got utilities as the best performers on the day, and yet real estate, another area that's certainly affected by interest rates the way utilities are, it's just not, really keeping up even with the index. It's higher, but not all that much higher. And then, across the board, I mean, you go from utilities to healthcare to materials to technology. I mean, what's the theme there? I couldn't tell you, except that perhaps we're seeing some life in the tech stocks after the last couple of days, when we saw the biggest companies in that area and their peers take a bit of a hit, at least in relative terms.
Right.
So, it's kind of hard to really pin it down in a sense. But there's certainly some strength, being shown in the market here.
Well, I like that idea of a grab bag of ideas in the market. Andrew Husby, come on in. You watch the U.S. economy. It's a day where durable goods orders were down more than 17%. GDP, as we know, coming in down 5%. Weekly jobless, another 2.1 million filing jobless claims. And yet we know this data was going to be bad.
Sure. These data, these monthly figures, and even the quarterly GDP report, these reflect both the leading edge, at least in the quarterly data, and really the eye of the storm for durable goods orders. We expect these to be incredibly weak. Now, that's all behind us. Obviously, most investors and markets are forward-looking, and one of the things that we've been watching as economists is one of the timeliest indicators for basically when this pandemic era begins to turn around has been the jobless claims figures, which come every week. We get one report, or one element of the report is initial claims. These are new filings. And then the other element of the report is continuing claims. These are claims that had been filed. These are re-upped, and you get a sense of basically net hiring. If that number keeps going up, that hiring is not keeping up with layoffs. If that number comes down for continuing claims, that net hiring is positive. And what we got this week for the first time since basically March was a drop in continuing claims claims filings by about 4 million, down from 25 million the prior week, now about 21 million. And this does tell us that mid-May, when a lot of states began to reopen, did coincide with what appears to be some net hiring under the surface. So
I keep calling it green shoots, but still, more than 40 million Americans have filed for benefits in the past 2.5 months, right?
It's an amazing number.
You just think about it, the history books, kids who, people weren't living in this era are going to look back at it and say, wait, what happened in these few months? What happened? When you feel like you try to talk about the outlook, Andrew, do you feel like there's more visibility starting to come, more green shoots that are giving us an idea, or not yet?
Yeah, certainly we're getting. This is certainly one of those shoots. It's sort of a necessary condition. It's not it's not sufficient to tell us that things really continue on this track uninterrupted as the year goes on, or as even the next few weeks and months go on, as we learn more about virus counts around the country and in other countries, importantly too. So all of that still has the potential to upset the apple cart a bit. But what we do see the next few months of data will still look pretty poor. Right. But as long as continuing claims data continue on a downtrend, there's at least some hope that the opening is going reasonably well.
All right, Andrew Husby, thank you so much. U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics. Dave Wilson, give us a tease for the chart.
I'm just going to say keep on trucking. How about that?
Yeah, that'll work, Carol. Absolutely. We can talk about how you break down transportation and what you see when you do.
Yeah, I love it. I love watching transportation. I think it's an important one. All right, Dave Wilson, Andrew Husby, thank you so much. Jason Kelly, we have so much going on today and several tussles to untangle, including Twitters with the president. We're going to get the latest from Washington, this expected executive order to come from Mr. Trump, so we'll get into that. And speaking of entanglements, the Chinese technology behemoth, we're talking about Huawei, they continue to get caught in all of these heightened tensions between the U.S. and China.
That's right. And, how is this all playing, all of these things that we're talking about, how are they playing for the consumer? We have one of the perfect voices to talk about it, and it's a company, we were talking about this a little bit earlier as we were taping some other things. It's a company that you probably know, and yet you don't know. You probably use their services, and yet you're largely unaware of them. We're talking about Synchrony, used to be a part of GE. We have the CEO, Margaret Keane. She's a fascinating person. She's going to help us understand what they're seeing from a consumer perspective and what they're seeing from the retail landscape, because we know that has been crushed amid all of this. So many data points that she and her team are synthesizing. I'm really looking forward to that conversation.
Right, especially in an era where there is so little visibility, right? So this is someone who's seeing day by day, minute by minute, what's going on with consumers. So looking forward to that conversation. Also, how states are reopening. We're going to hear from New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, David Weston, of course, catching up with the governor. And then still waiting to open, Jason, TikTok, post-COVID-19. Education.
Yeah, I think you and I have probably spent I don't know if it's disproportionate, but we spent a lot of time talking about this, thinking about it. It's personal, I think, for all of us who have kids, and certainly for people who have elementary school, high school, and college-age students. This is a world that has been turned upside down, and we want to talk with Sal Khan of Khan Academy about what's going to stick.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they have seen their demand go just off the roof. And so I'm curious to see what he says about online earning, how much of it does ultimately stick around. All right, let's get to the Bloomberg Business Week bite of the day. And the number, Jason, tells us a lot. Today's number is 76%.
Ralph Lauren said on Wednesday, online sales in China 76% in its fiscal fourth quarter. The luxury retailer said the surge in online shopping was helping it get back on track in China, putting it on course for a recovery from the damage wrought by the COVID-19 lockdowns. The New York-based company said it expanded the number of stores that could fulfill online orders, interesting, in the country during the pandemic, and rolled out digital services like advising big spending clients on style and events.
I just came off an event with Bloomberg Live with CEOs, and they're like, if you don't have a digital plan, you have to have one now. You better get it,
Where
get
have you been, bro?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Let's get a check on World and National News headlines. Over to Bob Moon we go. Hey, Bob.
Hi, Carol. They're trying to get a handle on the violence in Minneapolis. Mayor Jacob Fry responding to violent protests that have brought death and destruction to the streets of Minneapolis after an out-of-work security guard was killed by police officers on Monday. On the activity seen over the last few nights, the mayor says he believes in Minneapolis. At a press conference today, he said over the next few days, there will be an all-out effort to restore peace in Minneapolis.
I've authorized a unified command structure that allows our Chief Arredondo to utilize resources, personnel from other jurisdictions. We've requested assistance from the state, and we are thankful to the governor for the support.
There have been 2 straight nights of violence. The United Nations chief is warning world leaders that the COVID-19 pandemic will cause unimaginable devastation and suffering around the world, with historic levels of hunger and famine and up to 1.6 billion people unable to work. The House of Representatives failed to pass a bill that would require publication of the names of companies that receive small business loans in the millions of dollars. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports.
The bill was sponsored by Democrat Dean Phillips.
My bill, which simply injects transparency and accountability into the very largest expenditure of taxpayer money in American history. That's it.
Republican Steve Chabot led the opposition.
The bill attempts to name, and some would say shame, businesses, at least the ones that acted in good faith. They followed the law and the guidelines or received their loans based on the best information available at that time.
The Democratic majority voted for the bill, but under the current rules, it needed a 2/3 vote to pass. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm Bob Moon.
There are times when you have to go it alone, but these should not be those times.
With a medical crisis, can any other central bank execute?
When things move this quick, do things break?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz.
The range of outcomes is so wide.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern.
Walk me through the dynamics that are going to shape the euro.
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, BloombergRadio.com, and now watch us on Bloomberg Television.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the Lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
At Bloomberg, we know a lot.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Hairbands to kids. Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs.
Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
At Tesco, we've price matched Aldi on hundreds of products like bananas, peppers, chicken breasts, mushrooms, Warburton's bread, strawberries, even avocados. That's Tesco products at Aldi prices. Because now more than ever, every little helps. Tesco. Prices checked on comparable products from GB Aldi stores and online twice weekly. Price most often found matched excluding promotions. Selected Tesco stores excluding Express and all Northern Ireland stores. Products and their availability vary weekly and by store. Details at tesco.com/Aldi price match.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
Neil. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen. Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
He does! Fabry wins it!
To standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the playoffs, and I didn't think they belonged in the playoffs.
I think overall, though, it was a great divisional round weekend because you got the first one.
Run into the end zone with the Move the Sticks podcast.
We had a fun little Zoom cocktail hour last night.
Oh, yeah.
What a star-studded affair. Greg, you were there for the earlier part, but it really popped off a little later on. We had Zach Goldman.
And dive deep into the sidelines with the Peter King podcast.
On the occasion of his 50th birthday, come down and record a little bit of retrospective on the life and times of Brett Lorenzo Favre.
That sounds like a bestseller.
It sounds like a precursor to a funeral. That's what it is.
I wasn't thinking that.
Explore these and more hard-hitting NFL podcasts right here on TuneIn. Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
round the bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Lines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. U.S. stocks holding near the best session of the day with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. Stocks riding a 4-day rally to a 12-week high. S&P up now by 30 points, a gain of 1%. The Dow's up 178, up 0.7%. NASDAQ up 89. That is a gain of 1%. 10-year down 6/32 with a yield of 0.70%. Gold up 0.2%, 17.13 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude now up 3.5%, 33.98 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser, here with you on a Thursday afternoon. And this is a story that we really started talking about last week with our next guest. And we've been talking about it with him for years now. And it's really ratcheted up even over the past 24 to 48 hours. So we're talking about Hong Kong and China, its relationship, that crisis to the U.S. And the man we're talking about, Andy Brown, editorial director for Bloomberg New Economy, joining us on the phone from New Hampshire. So, Andy, help us understand what has happened of late, because it seems to have accelerated pretty quickly this week, and with some moves that are going to be hard to walk back. What do we need to know about what's going on in Hong Kong?
Yeah, well, Jason, you're absolutely right. Things have come to a head in Hong Kong with the National People's Congress, China's parliament, passing national security legislation, which is going to be imposed on Hong Kong, bypassing the Hong Kong legislature. And this is very clearly a prelude to a broad and very decisive crackdown on the democracy pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. And in response to that, the United States has determined that Hong Kong no longer enjoys autonomy or a sufficient level of autonomy from China. And we don't quite know what the implication of that is, but it could mean anything from the U.S. revoking Hong Kong's special trading status with the United States to going after the assets of individuals responsible for that legislation, or indeed something broader like an even broader decoupling in the financial sector, choking off the flow of funds into China, many of which are mediated through Hong Kong, which of course is one of the world's largest financial centers.
Andy, as you know, Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam, she defended the legislation earlier this week, and she said, quote, "It will not affect the legitimate rights and freedoms enjoyed by Hong Kong residents." Is she right? That's my first question. And what about this timing? Why is this happening? Is it because just of the protests, or was this, something that was going to come from China at some point?
Well, actually, it was supposed to have come from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, administration was supposed to have put in place a national security law many, many years ago, but has been putting it off in the face of course, massive, widespread opposition from all segments of Hong Kong society. Hence, it was imposed, without any form of review by the territory's legislature. So as far as Carrie Lam is concerned, saying that, this isn't a threat to the rule of law, we heard something similar from her predecessor, Tong Chi-hua. So you see that the essence of this law is it's going after secession, terrorism, sedition, collusion with foreign forces. And so Tong Chi-hua said, well, as long as you're not engaged in acts of terrorism, you're going to be fine, which is essentially what Carrie Lam seems to be saying. The problem is that these terms in the Chinese judicial lexicon can mean just about anything that the authorities want them to mean. And they're used in China to go after a huge, broad array of dissidents, NGO people, the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and so these are catch-all terms. Furthermore, the legislation is going to be accompanied by a physical presence in Hong Kong of the security services from agencies from China, Ministry of State Security, Ministry of Public Security. So, it's not clear what degree of oversight or interpretation, if any, that Hong Kong courts will have over this new national security agency law. At the very minimum, you can say that it will exist side by side with law that is there to protect freedom in Hong Kong, and it will also include this shadowy parallel presence of Chinese security forces operating side by side with the Hong Kong police force.
So, Andy, to be a little bit parochial about this from my perspective, I think about our listeners, many of whom work in and around Wall Street. They work in the financial industry, the financial services industry. If you're sitting at JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, any number of global banks, you have a big presence in Hong Kong. What are you thinking about right now in terms of your people who are there now? And maybe more importantly, how do you think about Hong Kong in the near to midterm future?
Yeah, so, many details of this legislation, are yet to be revealed. We don't know how it's going to be implemented. Will it be swift? Will it be brutal? Will it be hard? Will it be, we don't know. I think probably if you're investing in Hong Kong right now, your immediate concern is about street violence, is about the chaos that's bringing the Hong Kong economy to its knees. You may even be somewhat relieved that there's legislation coming which could potentially snuff that out and sort of revive Hong Kong as a business center. If you're looking at it long term and you're thinking the degree to which Hong Kong is a financial center, and as I say, one of the world's great financial centers, the degree to which it is founded upon the rule of law, and the extent to which this national security legislation undermines that rule of law, then I think you're going to be very alarmed. And at the very least, I think what you're going to see is a hedging behavior now by companies, financial services companies. The ones that don't have to be there are probably going to start leaving. The big banks have to be there. They can't just take off and leave. But I think you will see a drain of businesses. You'll certainly see a drain of talent. The United Kingdom just today or yesterday announced that it was going to give additional visa rights to 300,000 Hong Kong British passport holders, not full residency, but additional visa rights. Taiwan has said that it will offer shelter to Hong Kong people. So I think you're going to see a real outflow of talent.
All right. Well, we appreciate your context as always. Andy Browning knows so much about this. Editorial director for Bloomberg New Economy, joining us on the phone from New Hampshire. One quick headline: New Jersey COVID-19 cases up 0.8%. That's versus the prior 7-day average of 0.6%.
We're going to hear more from New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy a little bit later on in that interview with David Weston. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks are riding their longest rally of the pandemic, with prices up for a fourth day. The Dow Industrials up 153, the S&P up 26, the Nasdaq gaining 76. Even as more people lose their jobs, unemployment rolls have begun to shrink. The government says ongoing jobless claims fell in the second week of May, the first decline of the pandemic. Still, 2.1 million new claims were filed last week. HBO Max is off to a soft start. Its app was downloaded about 90,000 times on its first day, according to Sensor Tower, versus 4 million for Disney+. HBO Max is counting on new customers, not just converts from current HBO services. As many of us look to ride out the pandemic at home, backyard pools are gaining in popularity. Pool equipment distributor Pool Corporation is seeing strong demand this month. Its stock is at a record high since it went public in 1995. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
When you went car shopping, you meant business. You aced vehicle history searches and test drives. You out-salesmaned the salesman. Now you've got your wheels. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll have the info you need to get more for your future. Go to aceyourretirement.org, because when it comes to speeding past financial challenges, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
COVID-19. Can the world reopen for business?
Give us a sense of how you're ramping up and taking care of folks on the ground.
What's the long-term impact?
Why will we not see a V-shaped recovery?
When will there be a cure or a vaccine?
How can you model that at a time when it's unclear whether we're going to see a resurgence in viruses?
The answers will emerge.
Can you give us a sense of timing?
And you'll find them here. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. In-depth analysis.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus symptoms and testing. If you have any one of the following symptoms, a high temperature, a new continuous cough, loss of taste or smell, you can now get tested. Do not leave home for any reason other than to get tested. Find out how to get a test and how long to isolate at nhs.uk/coronavirus. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Hammer Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these
City.
and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game, from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone,
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night, and there's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Rise to the 5! Touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Right now, it feels more like a boxing match. Could turn into a legal fight. We're talking about Trump versus Twitter.
Yeah, the virtual world becomes reality, right? Very quickly.
See what you did there. I
like
it.
You like that?
That's good.
I had an extra cup of coffee this morning.
It shows. All right. We're going to get to that with Josh Wingrove in just a second. First, let's get to Charlie Pellet for an update on the trade. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Jason Kelly. Twitter shares down now by 2.4%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ higher. Off-session highs close to it. 12-week high for the S&P, up 25 right now at 3,061. That is a gain of 0.8%. The Dow up 135, up 0.5. NASDAQ up 71. That is a gain of 0.8%. Stocks are riding a 4-day rally now to a 12-week high as data shows the economic damage from the coronavirus pandemic was less severe than anticipated. Treasuries fell, the 10-year down 6/32, yield 0.70%. Gold up 0.2%, 17.13 the ounce, and crude up 2.6%, 33.67 a barrel. Citigroup plans to open its New York headquarters to a small number of employees as soon as July. Workers will return to its London offices even earlier as CEO Michael Corbat pushes the bank forward into a world reshaped by the coronavirus pandemic. And in a Bloomberg television and radio interview this morning, Corbat talked about the pandemic, the economy, and the effect on Citigroup.
We've got to recognize that this is not at its core an economic crisis. This is a health crisis. And I think the great news is that not only Citi, but much of the financial system has gone into this from a position of strength. From our place, it's capital, it's liquidity, it's business model, all of those things. And the investments that we've made in technology and infrastructure so far have served us really well.
Citigroup shares, they're down now by 4%. HP Inc. reported declining quarterly sales, signaling the coronavirus pandemic has disrupted the supply chain of one of the world's largest PC makers. HP Inc. shares, they're plunging now by 11%. Recapping equities higher across the board, 12-week high on the S&P, up 24 at 3,060, up right now by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So he has threatened to shut them down. Now President Trump says this will be a big day for social media and fairness as he's expected to sign an executive order aimed at Twitter and other tech giants. He's also singled out one specific Twitter employee for those fact-checking tweets. Let's get into this story because it just gets more interesting and kind of a hotter story each day goes by. Bloomberg News White House correspondent Josh Wingrove joining us on the phone on this Thursday. So, Josh, we're going to get this executive order?
Well, it sounds like it's in flux. The press briefing is ongoing, and the press secretary just said that they're continuing to work on this. You remember yesterday it was supposed to come last night, and today they haven't really given a time. So it sounds like they're still working on it. The draft that is floating out publicly right now targets social media companies by kind of taking aim at that shield that they have on liability, the Section 230 protections that treat them as sort of a conduit rather than a publisher. It sounds like they're going to try to rattle the cage somehow on it, but executive orders have murky authority at best. It is well short of legislation, and so the actual impact is going to depend a lot on that sort of fine text, and again, we just don't know where it's going to land.
Well, without being too silly about this, Josh, if I think about the relationship that the President of the United States, both as a candidate and now as the leader of the free world, has with social media and specifically with Twitter, you might say it's complicated. He's relied heavily on it, to say the least, and certainly has galvanized a lot of support, but also galvanized a lot of opposition. I mean, help us understand the politics of this, because the net effect might be good for him, might not be. How are folks around inside the Beltway and outside considering this?
There is a long-running grievance among conservatives that they think that social media and big tech treat them unfairly and target conservative voices unfairly. Trump has been sort of, circling this issue on and off since the start of his presidency, and this sort of fact-check label that came on for the first time this week sort of blew it up again and pushed it to the front of his mind, but it's been there for a while. And so we've seen, for instance, them target this particular Twitter employee, Yoel Roth, who's the head of site integrity, essentially like protecting Twitter against bots and misuse. He's tweeted negative things in the administration about the administration, and they're saying, "Look, how do you have an employee doing that while you're coming at us for lying?" So I think Twitter has, taken steps to, fact check some of the president's tweets. The ones that effectively accuse Joe Scarborough, the MSNBC host, of murder, have so far not been fact checked at all. This is, in some ways, a red meat base issue for the president, because many of his voters and supporters believe that Twitter and other sites aren't giving them a fair shake.
What's amazing is, I think some would say it's long overdue for these social media sites to be responsible about what's on their site, right, and do fact-checking. At the same time, you do wonder, what the slippery slope is that we maybe go down here. And I just do wonder, it feels like regulators have backed off a little bit about, focusing on social media companies, but I do wonder if we start to see Congress kind of jump back into the fray at this point.
It's a great question. One of the questions that's also been raised is, is it these companies' place to police truth? And, I don't think that's necessarily a partisan issue. And by that, I mean, I think you'd find some Democrats who might be uncomfortable with the idea of handing Twitter and Google and the likes even more power over our lives than they have now to start deciding what is true or not. The way the press secretary put it is the president today, she said he wants to make sure big tech does not stifle free speech. Now, this kind of backs him into a bit of a corner, because the president can't be seen to be targeting Twitter too much in fighting for free speech, because of course it would amount to censorship of Twitter in his fight against censorship. But that hasn't necessarily stopped him in the past. So I think that we will see something come out. The draft order is not as harsh as Trump has made it sound, and it sounds like they're still wrangling over it. So whether the final order is, more watered down or more beefed up, I think remains to be seen. But I think it'll be a lobbying frenzy either way for big tech in Washington.
I'm just going to say, Josh, it's definitely an election year.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes we forget that amid everything else going on. All right, Josh Wingrove, White House correspondent for Bloomberg. We really appreciate your time. Great political context there. We talked with Sarah Fryer yesterday. You can check that out on our podcast feed. But this is important. It's important for us to understand this. Twitter shares, by the way, they're down about 2.6% today after being down about the same amount yesterday.
All right, let's get back to World and National News headlines. Let's check in once again with Bob Moon. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Carol. And apparently the Democratic House Speaker and the President of the United States agree on at least the need for some kind of regulation of social media companies. On President Trump's plan to regulate social media companies after Twitter fact-checked a couple of his tweets, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at her weekly press conference today said she's felt strongly about the role social media companies play in the flow of information for a long time now.
Yes, we like Twitter to put up their fact-check the president, but it seems to be very selective. Very selective.
Trump has been threatening to shut down Twitter for flagging false content. An estimated 2.1 million Americans applied for unemployment benefits last week, despite the gradual reopening of businesses around the country, bringing the running total since the coronavirus shutdowns began to about 41 million, according to the government. In a glimmer of hope, the overall number of people currently drawing jobless benefits in the U.S. fell for the first time since the crisis began from 25 million to 21 million, suggesting some companies are starting to rehire. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bob Moon.
When you shop Goodwill, you don't just bring home a vintage dress or cat lamp. You bring home so much good to your community, because everything you buy funds local job training and more. Goodwill, bring good home. Brought to you by Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Jenny Liss, Jewish communal leader and philanthropist, talks about why she chose the Jewish Communal Fund for her family's charitable giving.
For a lot of people, it would be the convenience factor. I don't have to track anything.
If charitable giving is an important part of your life, JCF can help you organize your philanthropy with our donor-advised fund. A fund can be established with a minimum tax-deductible contribution of $5,000. Make grants to your favorite charities, and JCF handles all the administration and reporting.
At the year end, our board awards community grants from fees and endowment income to UJ's annual campaign. We also make gifts to specific organizations, the elderly, Holocaust survivors, the hungry. The fact that we come together as a community at the end of the year to build community, that's what makes us different.
Get better at giving back. To find out more about JCF's impact, visit jcfny.org and download the Giving Report. JCF, we have a gift for giving.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
COVID-19. On days when...
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
At Tesco, we've price-matched Aldi on hundreds of products, like bananas, peppers, chicken breasts, mushrooms, Warburton's bread, strawberries, even avocados. That's Tesco products at Aldi prices. Because now more than ever, every little helps.